Chapter 54. Izuku is in for several surprises the next time Night Eye calls him and Tagada in for an office meeting. For one thing, it's not just a meeting for members of Night Eye's agency. Kirishima is there, along with the Magica Senpai and their internship supervisor, the hero Fat Gun. There are a few others that Izuku somewhat recognizes, faces from other agencies. Even Aizawa Sensei is here. For another, there's the topic of today's meeting. My colleague and I have suspected for a while that the separate cases we've been pursuing are linked, Night Eye says, with a respectful nod to Fat Gun. Today the test results came back on the quirk suppression bullets recovered from Fat Gun's recent encounter with villains, and he was good enough to share them with me. Not just my encounter. Fat Gun breaks in. My fine young interns did most of the encountering, in fact, and did quite well for themselves. A Magic tries to sink lower in the seat, until Tagada gives him an encouraging nudge. The meeting is somewhat informal, at least by Night Eye's standards, so there's not much of a seating arrangement. Fat Gum actually encouraged the interns to sit together, which is fantastic because office meetings are so much easier for Izuku to sit through when Kirishima is next to him. I don't think I need to remind you all that the information I'm about to divulge must not leave this room except through the appropriate authorized channels. Night Eye's hawk-like gaze settles briefly on Izuku and Kirishima. And if talking about policy doesn't convince you, then keep in mind there's a little girl on the line. Kirishima stiffens. Izuku sits up a little straighter in his seat. The look that his classmates shoots him promises questions in the foreseeable future. Thanks to my intern's efforts, we were able to retrieve broken and intact bullets from the scene, Fat Gum continues with a proud grin at Kirishima and Amachiki. And therefore, we could send the quirk-suppressing serum to labs for analysis. Do we know the serum's chemical makeup? Then one of the other heroes asks. Or how the villains synthesized it in the first place? They didn't, Night Eye says grimly. At least not in the way you're thinking. Izuku looks at him, shocked. This has to do with Overhaul, or Night Eye wouldn't be involved at all. Does this mean he isn't the one making quirk-suppressing drugs after all? He shoots a quick glance at Tagada, but his upperclassman seems just as startled as he is. Upon analysis, the contents of these bullets prove not to be synthesized chemicals, Night Eye continues. At least, not entirely. There is chemical modification, presumably to refine it, but the serum is largely biological, composed of blood and cells. A leaden pit lodges itself in Izuku's belly, heavy dread pressing him down into his seat. As some of you may know, my own interns encountered a young girl flame capture from Overhaul, Night Eye continues. They were able to extract her, and she is currently recovering in a location that I will not disclose at this time. The cells in the bullets are a perfect match for her DNA. Izuku can feel his heartbeat in his ears. The sounds around him turn muffled, as if everyone is speaking underwater. His eyes are fixed on Night Eye's grey face, and when he turns to Tagada again, the latter is staring at him in horror. But why? One of the other heroes asks. Of all the ways to create a drug like this, why make it out of some little girl's blood? Izuku's teeth grind. It's likely that it's something to do with her quirk, which we haven't discerned yet, Night Eye answers. He sounds tired. She's currently suppressing it, most likely due to the trauma. Fat Gum gets to his feet. If this is the case, then finding and detaining Overhaul is of the utmost importance, he says. She isn't safe until he and his organization are off the streets. We also have the rumors to think about, Aizawa Sensei speaks up now. Underground heroes and their informants have heard whispers of Overhaul meeting with the remaining major figures of the League of Villains. With All for One gone, they'll be looking for new ways to remove heroes' quirks from the equation. As Izuku puts his hands under the table to hide how his nails dig into his palms, Night Eye nods. We are no longer accepting a rotation of nurses, her current caretakers remain on site, and the building is under heavy surveillance to prevent Toda Himika from infiltrating by replacing one of them. We'll also be moving sites in the next few days, because one of the cameras outside caught a man whose physical build is a bit too similar to Compress's. There are other measures. Izuku hears no more of the discussion, because as soon as Toda and Compress come up, his ears are already roaring. A gentle nudge from Kirishima makes him look over at him just in time to see his mouth form the words "You okay?" Izuku nods, not trusting himself to smile. It seems like just yesterday that he reassured All Might over this very thing, that for once he would face an enemy who wasn't the League of Villains. As soon as the meeting is over, Izuku leaves his seat and heads for the nearest empty hallway. He just needs to get his head together. If he doesn't, then Night Eye might notice, and Izuku can't be sure he won't remove him from this assignment for getting emotionally compromised over it. The pounding in his ears has barely gone down when he hears a warning hiss from Rei, followed by a voice he only barely recognizes. I remember now. Izuku's heartbeat jackrabbits in his chest. The ghost is back, is close, but Rei has him by the hand to keep him from getting too close. Quickly, Izuku takes in his surroundings and spots the nearest restroom, one of the single-stall types that can be locked directly at the entrance door. He leads the ghosts into the bathroom, then shuts and locks the door and turns to Rei's ghost. Tell me what you remember, he says. Blood. The ghost flickers. Rei lets go of him, but keeps a close eye on him in case he gets more agitated. He took her blood. Other things, too. Bone marrow. You mean overhaul, right? Izuku says. He took Rei's blood. This is far from new information, but Izuku needs confirmation and a coherent ghost. The ghost nods. My daughter. Izuku is glad to hear that she's not really Overhaul's daughter, but his heart still sinks. Did he do this to you? No, the dead man shakes his head and keeps shaking it as if trying to clear it. No, God, what was she thinking? What did Overhaul do? Izuku asks. He took her blood, Eri's father tells him. He wants to use it, so he took her blood, he took pieces of her, again and again and again, until she couldn't give any more, and then, he breaks off with a strangled sob, ducking and twisting his hands into his hair. He took her apart, Izuku says softly. And put her back together again, good as new. Right? It hurts, the ghost sobs again. It hurts her so much she can't even cry anymore. Is that his quirk? Another nod. It's so crowded. The ghost trembles. Anyone he doesn't like, anyone who disobeys, he takes them apart and leaves them in pieces. Sometimes they are just a smear on the wall. Some of them won't stop screaming. Why does he want her? Izuku presses. What's in her blood? No. No, you don't understand. You're right, he says. I don't understand. That's why I need your help. I need to know what she has that he wants. If it's her quirk. His back hits the locked door hard enough to drive the wind from him. It wasn't her fault, the ghost screams at him until he's afraid his ears will bleed. It wasn't her fault. She didn't know. I didn't know. None of us knew. Knew what? A hoarse sob rips itself from the ghost's chest, and he answers. Night Eye is reorganizing case files in his office when Midoriya finds him. Sir, do you remember the ghost I told you about? He asks, closing the door behind him. The one following air. There's a note of urgency in his tone, as well as a hint of breathlessness, as if he was in a rush to reach Night Eye's office. There is not, however, any trace of sarcasm, which means Midoriya somehow expected him to forget that there is a ghost involved in all of this. Yes? He's lucid enough to remember things. Midoriya crosses the room to his desk. I was right, he's her father. Night Eye stops what he's doing and looks up at this, silently urging Midoriya to continue. At first I thought Overhaul killed him to take Eri, but I was wrong. He died when Eri's quirk came in. Midoriya meets his eyes. She rewinds things. It manifested when he picked her up, and she rewound him so far back that there was nothing left of him. Night Eye already has his phone out, tapping out a quick message to Eri's current caretakers. He's lucky they won't ask him how he came by this information. His heart sinks with pity. This is always a risk in quirk society. Quirk manifestation can be a dangerous thing. No one can expect a 4-year-old child to have control of a power they've only had for a few seconds. Does he know how she ended up with Overhaul? He asks, his voice tight. Midoriya's face darkens and his mouth twists with contempt. His wife, Eri's mother, is the daughter of Overhaul's Yakuza boss. They're estranged, but when her husband died, she left Eri with them and ran off. Once Overhaul found out what her quirk was, he started torturing her. He lifts his chin. That's how the serum must work, right? He must have modified it so her quirk would just rewind people's quirk factors until they don't exist anymore. A logical guess, Night Eye says grimly. He never thought he would find himself at this point, making judgments on the words of a dead man. But it's a solid lead. Could he tell you anything else? I was lucky to get that much out of him, Midoriya says. He's still not all there. Watching his daughter go through that for over a year must have messed him up. After his intern finishes delivering his information and leaves, Night Eye puts down the folder in his hand and closes his eyes to process everything. He still isn't used to this. He's been in this line of work for 20 years and he shouldn't be this squeamish, but something about having the dead answer back with words instead of tissue samples and DNA analyses unnerves him. Like an autopsy, he reminds himself. Evidence is gathered from the dead every day. That's all that Midoriya's quirk is in the end. It shouldn't be any different from forensic science. But it is. Cadavers don't have feelings, but if Midoriya is to be believed, the same can't be said of spirits. Dark thoughts stick with him after that, even bleeding into his meeting with Eraserhead the following day. They arrived at home there because the underground heroes' news is grim. They are on the move, Eraserhead says as they go over intelligence reports. The city's crawling with Overhaul's people looking for leads, keeping watch. Foot soldiers mostly, with a few bigger threats among them. Night Eye passes his hand over his face. He's known this would be the case. It was obvious even before they knew the full extent of Air's role in Overhaul's operation. But he's never been able to find hard evidence of it, at least through normal pro-hero intelligence channels. But Eraserhead is no normal pro. Underground heroes have their own methods, their own channels, their own tactics, the kind that heroes who work in the open would balk at. It means that Overhaul is making his moves on a massive scale and covering his tracks so well that is nearly undetectable to normal police work. He says as much to Eraserhead, who grimaces. That's the problem with obsolete criminal entities, he says dryly. Yakuzas are small-time symbols of the past now. They are like scenery. A backdrop to modern criminal activity. And that means the structures to keep track of their movements just out there in a more. Overhaul knows that and is taking full advantage of it. His lips turn up and he shows his teeth. It's a smile, technically, but there's no happiness or humor in it. Another downside to our former #1 hero's run. His words stir up the settled ire within Night Eye. It must show on his face because Eraserhead grimaces again and moves on. Regardless, it's taking all I have just to stay on top and ahead of them, if you can call it that. Be cautious, Night Eye says, a bit snappishly. If you get yourself caught, it won't help anyone in the long run. A thought occurs to him then. You may very well be in danger yourself. If Overhaul's aim is to erase quirks, then yours would be of interest to him as well. Believe you me, I know. Eraserhead doesn't appear affected by Night Eye's tone. But caution is becoming less and less effective. Overhaul's people are closing in. If they continue this way, then they'll find where we are keeping her eventually, either by process of elimination or by catching you in the act of moving her. The only options are to take them down before they find her, or wait for her to be found and take them then. I won't use a little girl as bait for her abusers, Night Eye grits out. Nor will I risk open war with criminals in the streets. The safety of the public is unstable enough as it is. Open war may happen whether we like it or not, Eraserhead said grimly. They can afford to now, do you know why? Overhaul's alliance with the League of Villains may be considered hearsay officially, but in unofficial circles it's well past the point of being a rumor. In fact, it's the only reason why I've been able to track Overhaul's operation at all. The lead may be quiet lately, but at least their movements are recognizable. Night Eye clenches his teeth and says nothing. After a moment, Eraserhead lets out a sharp sigh. All I'm saying is this, you can't keep this quiet and subtle and safe. It's going to get ugly. However it ends, we may very well lose good people by the time it's over. I can't accept that, Night Eye says tightly. I know our worlds are different, Eraserhead, but I won't accept that. Nobody has to die here. He waits, but Eraserhead doesn't answer, so he continues. It would at least help to know who Overhaul's main contacts in the League are. Do you have any idea who that is? But Eraserhead doesn't answer. He's staring straight ahead, eyes misting over as if lost in thought. Eraserhead, Night Eye says. The underground hero blinks slowly, as if coming out of a deep daydream. Say that again, he says. What? What did you just say? Eraserhead is frowning, more present but still deep in thought. I wanted to know who Overhaul's main contacts are in the League of Villains. No, Eraserhead says. Before that, Night Eye has to think for a moment. I said that nobody has to die. That's for a moment. Eraserhead just looks lost. His brow furrows, and when he speaks again, he seems to sound the words out carefully. That's not really up to you, is it? It's not an odd thing to say so much as an odd way to say it. For the briefest of moments, Night Eye is almost tempted to have a look at Eraserhead's fate for a clue, but it's an easy idea to squash. Are you feeling quite all right? Eraserhead shakes his head, not to say no but to clear it. Yes. You just reminded me of something one of my students said to me once at the USJ, no less, when the League first showed up. Things must be pretty desperate if you're starting to quote my students by accident, especially if it's that student. The shadows under his eyes deepen. Have you slept recently? Night Eye asks, though he suspects that he already knows the answer. By my standards, Eraserhead answers unhelpfully. The discussion resumes and doesn't touch that topic again, but Eraserhead remains quiet and thoughtful throughout it. This time, when Izuku leaves campus right after school, Kirishima is the one to watch him leave. Now that Todoroki knows firsthand where he keeps disappearing, he barely gives Izuku's departures a second glance. This has the unexpected bonus of getting Uraraka and Ida to stop giving him weird looks, too. They must assume that Todoroki worries about him enough to be a trustworthy gauge of whether or not Izuku is doing something stupid, which he's glad of, because it's hard to reassure them when security issues prevent him from telling everyone about what he's doing for his internship and why. All this just means that Kirishima's attention is that much more noticeable. Izuku returns the look with an apologetic shrug. He'll ask Night Eye later about how much he can tell Kirishima, especially since the two agents are seen to be working together on this. For now, he has a visit to make. He's a little excited today. He called his mother recently to ask about some of the children's storybooks she stored away after he outgrew them, and now 5 of them are crammed into his backpack. One of the higher-level office workers from Night Eye's agency comes to pick him up. Tagada can't make the trip with him today. Night Eye has him on patrol, so he'll probably show up later if he decides to come in at all. He will. They haven't gotten Eri to smile yet. Izuku gets a text from Night Eye alerting him to a change in the watch schedule. Centipede is supposed to be the one screening people who go in and out of the building where they are hiding Eri, but he called in for a replacement after taking sick during his watch shift. Izuku's heart goes out to him. It's well into autumn, and that means flu season is upon them. Bubble Girl is nice, though. She greets him with a smile and a light bulb jerk when he's dropped off. How many ranked heroes does it take to change a light bulb? Just one. They don't like to share the spotlight, and they trade code words before she lets him through. Anybody else come through? He asks hopefully. There's a small chance Miria has already finished up. Nope. And Centipede said the same thing when I asked him. She passes him the comm device. Here's your panic button, you know the drill. Yeah, thanks. Izuku picks up his pace to jog through the lobby, adjusting the straps on his backpack. This area is usually empty. Everyone who enters knows exactly what they are there for, and the heroes at the door are the ones controlling access, so there's no need for a receptionist desk. There's definitely something to be said about secret operations. They are very efficient. Rei darts ahead of him through the first door, and he can't help smiling at her excitement. She likes being around Air, even if Izuku is the only one who knows she's there. Sometimes he thinks she misses the days when he was smaller than her, and being around Air reminds her of them. One of the medical technicians steps out into the hallway and spots him. Oh, hello, Midoriya-kun, she greets him. Did you need something? By itself, it's an innocuous question. There's no real reason for Izuku to do anything but offer a polite no and keep walking. And yet, Izuku pauses because it's odd. It's an odd thing to say to someone who's just arrived, who's scheduled to be here, who's walking in a straight line because he knows exactly where he's going. No, he says, almost asks. I just got here. Air is not in a different room, is she? The technician blinks at him, confusion clouding her face. She shouldn't be, she says. Is that why you're back down here? Did you have trouble finding her? And Izuku's heart sinks low, low in his chest, so low it has to be reaching his stomach. What do you mean, back? I mean I just spoke to you a minute ago, the technician says. If you're back down already, then... Izuku is already running, tearing off his backpack to rid himself of excess weight. He barely remembers calming Bubble Girl before he has his phone to his ear, dialing as he runs down the hallway and makes for the nearest stairs. Night Eye, to his credit, picks up on the first ring. I'm at the facility, he says, as soon as he hears Night Eye breathe over the line. Ray is long gone by the time he yanks the door open and launches himself up the steps with one for all. I just got here and one of the technicians told me she already saw me pass through. Night Eye's breath hisses as if through clenched teeth. I'm sending. Izuku doesn't hear the end of that sentence because someone knocks his feet out from under him on his way up the stairs. His phone flies from his hand and out of reach. His chin eats the corner of a step and he narrowly avoids biting his tongue. With a yell, he flips over to face his attacker and struggles to his feet, still dazed as blood trickles down his throat. The stairwell is dim, but not dim enough for his eyes. He knows the villain standing over him. He hasn't seen her since Kamina, but she's unmistakable. He spits at Magna. Seriously? Don't tell me you people are working with Yakuzas now. Is this how desperate the lead is? The villain doesn't rise to his taunt. He struggles to his feet, or tries, but Magna's foot comes down hard on his chest, pinning him to the stairs. With her shoe crushing him like that, he can feel her shaking. Holy shit, she grits out. It's true. It's true. What are you talking about? It's nothing personal, she says. Well, that's a lie. It's very personal. But not against you. Her lips stretch wide in a smile, showing the blood in her teeth. Are you worried about Overhaul? Don't be. Soon as they get him the girl, he'll hand over the formula, and then he'll be all yours. Shigaraki'll wrap him up in a nice little bow for you. Maybe he'll send him in pieces. She laughs, and it's high and clear and cold. His eyes adjust further, and Magna meets his gaze. Do you understand, she asks, fixing him with her blank, dead-white eyes. He has to pay first. He hurt Compress. He killed me. And we're not like him. No one's a tool, no one's a pawn. Every one of us is in it together, and that's why he'll get what's coming to him. You heroes, her shoe digs further into his chest. Her voice rises. You two-faced hypocrites can have what's left on a silver platter. All yours. You won't even have to lift a finger. All it'll cost you is one little girl. Ray appears without a sound, but by the time she hits Magna, the stairwell is echoing with her howling. Magna falls back, flickering as she screams, and Izuku scrambles up and keeps running. He makes the mistake of looking back, just in time to see Magna revert back to what Overhaul left of her. It isn't much. The next floor is A's. Izuku hears Magna's screams and Ray snarling, forces down the sickening horror, and prays he won't be too late. Eri has been quiet since Deku got here. She's almost never quiet when he's here. If anything, it's the only time she isn't quiet, because when Deku comes, he brings so many things to talk about. Books. Pictures. Funny little movies. Sometimes he just sits and tells her stories, tells her about things and places she's never heard of before. He talks, she listens, and best of all, he lets her ask questions. She loves it. He's scary sometimes, but she isn't afraid of him, and she knows he isn't afraid of anything because he's scary. No one who's that scary can be afraid of anything, and if she stays with someone who's scarier, then people who hurt her, well, then no one's going to hurt her, right? She feels safe. She's never felt safe before. And she doesn't feel safe now. What's the matter, Eri-chan? He smiles at her, again, but it's all wrong. When he smiles at her like that, it feels like his eyes are raking over her, digging under her skin and catching. Erin knows what to do around people who look at her that way. She presses her lips closed, looks at the floor, and doesn't move. Oh, don't be like that. He touches her face, and when she pulls away without thinking, he touches her again anyway, squeezing until his fingers dig into her cheeks. You're so cute and soft, Eri-chan, and you have the sweetest little voice. Eri's heart sinks low, low, low in her chest, and it doesn't come back up. Deku doesn't touch her unless it's okay with her first, but now he is, and that means it's finally over. It's always like this with her babysitters. They are nice to her, they speak softly and give her things, but eventually they get tired of it. They stop asking and start making her do things, and Deku was better at it, it lasted longer and it felt different, but now it's back to the same, all over again, and it feels so much worse because Era forgot to be ready for it. That's such a sad face, Era-chan. Deku frowns at her, squeezing her cheeks again. Tell you what, I brought you something that might make you feel better. Do you want to see what it is? Era doesn't answer. People who talk to her like this never actually want her to, even when they ask her questions. Come on. I'll show you. Deku gets up and pulls at her, forcing her to her feet while Era's stomach ties itself in knots. She raises her eyes again, and there's nothing right about the smile on Deku's face. His voice is quiet but eager, like he's sharing a secret with her. Hurry up, Era-chan, let's go. You'll love it, I know you will. He's tumbling across the floor in the next moment, over and over until he stops, and then Eri's view of him is blocked. Sorry, Eri. It's Deku's voice, but Deku isn't talking, he's still on the floor. His voice is coming from the person in front of her. Era looks up and sees another Deku standing there. This Deku isn't like the first. This one looks angry. I'm sorry I didn't get here faster. You must be really confused, huh? Eri stares. Do you remember what book we read together yesterday? Deku, the one standing in front of her, asks. She nods. She had asked him about birds once, and he brought her a book full of pictures. Deku turns to her, and she sees his face fully. Would you like to try asking that one what book it was? For a moment Eri forgets where she is and when she is. She's not sitting in the playroom with the nurse's station right outside, wearing a soft clean robe just her size. She's out in the street, the rough ground scraping her sore feet, in a dirty, itchy smock that slips off one shoulder because of a tear in the neck. Deku's face looks the same now as it did then, teeth bared and eyes bright, angry but not at her, scary but not to her. She doesn't need to ask, Era realizes as she coils her fingers into his pad leg. She knows which one is her Deku. The other Deku, the fake one, is standing again, smiling that Rom smile again. His teeth look sharp. Did you know I was here? He asked the real Deku. You did, didn't you? You totally knew I was here. Were you excited to see me again, Izuku-chan? I've missed you so much. Deku is glowing. He's sparking green all over, but the sparks don't hurt even when they touch her. It feels warm. Warm and strong and safe and just a little bit frightening, but for someone else. Someone who isn't her. He doesn't say anything. He just stands in front of A and waits. The Rom Deku's smile fades a little. You were so much fun before, he says, almost whines. But now you won't even talk to me. It's been so long, Izuku-chan. I missed you. Didn't you miss me, too? Even just a little. When Deku doesn't answer, his face changes. It's stretched and ugly, and not Deku's face was already wrong before, but seeing this makes Air want to curl up small and hide. I know you did. Don't try to lie. You're special, Izuku-chan. You're special to me, and I'm special to you. I know it. I can prove. Eri hears nothing more. The room vanishes, the floor, the walls, the toys and books and Deku and not Deku all vanish. Eri is somewhere small, curled up and cramped with no idea which way is up or down. She can't hear or see, everything is dark and silent, closing around her, crushing her into nothing. She tries to cry for help, but she can't even hear herself scream. And then, as suddenly as it started, it's over. She's back in the world again, but the playroom is gone, and there are arms around her, pulling her close. Deku's arms. She's so close she can hear him breathing, fast and short and noisy. She hasn't seen this hallway before. It looks like the rest of this place, but she doesn't know where it is. She's too scared to leave the places she has already been, too scared of straying far enough for him to find her. She doesn't know where she is, only that Deku is here, holding her. He got her out, he got her away from him, and when she asked him not to let go, he didn't. There's a man in the hallway before them. She can't see his face behind the mask, but she can hear his voice. The wrong Deku is gone, and the real one is beside her, breathing funny and shaking against her. He's shaking. Era twists around to look at him. He doesn't look back because his eyes are on the man in the mask and he won't move, won't talk, won't look at anyone or anything else. She's never seen him scared before. Ah, the man is saying. I was wondering if you remembered me. But you do, don't you? Stay away. Deku's voice shakes. You know I can't do that, Midoriya, the man tells him and steps toward them. Deku pulls back, but there's a wall in the way. But you don't have to worry, because I'm not here to take you back. I'm here for the girl only. I'm warning you. It doesn't just shake, it cracks, like Deku's voice is breaking apart and the rest of him is going to do the same. There's someone Deku is scared of, Eri thinks. There's someone who's so strong, so terrible, that Deku can't do anything but shake and cry in front of them. She knows what that's like. I can take you back all the same if you make this difficult, the man says. Is that what you want? I'm afraid it would be a much longer journey with Kurogiri out of reach for now. He lifts his hand and Deku flinches. The man is fast and there's nowhere to run, but Deku throws her out of the way. She hits the floor and rolls, and when she looks back, Deku is gone and the man is holding a shiny marble. He sighs, annoyed, and flicks it away. It breaks and Deku hits the wall and slides down. He doesn't make any sound except his sharp, quick breathing, but there are tears on his face as he presses himself back. You are trying my patience, the man says. You try all our patience and I've half a mind to take you along anyway, but you've always been more trouble than you're worth. I could always use my quirk on you and leave you here. How long do you think it would take them to find you? He steps forward and raises his hand again, and Deku shrinks back just like her old babysitters before they died, just like his people when he's angry, just like her. Wait. She stands and her heartbeat rattles in her chest and her throat tastes the way it always does when she's about to be sick. But that's okay. That's okay, she tells herself and wishes she could believe it. The man is looking at her now, she thinks. His hand hovers over Deku and she makes her feet carry her forward until it lowers. Wait, she says again. Don't. I'll go with you. Eri. Deku's voice hisses and rattles out of him, but the masked man's hand comes up again and he chokes on her name. I'll go, she says, and she's already crying, but she says it anyway because Deku is nice and good and he doesn't deserve to be scared, not for someone who's cursed and broken already. Not for her. I'll go if you don't hurt him. You can do it to me, not him. Please. Interesting, the masked man says. You say that when you don't even know what I'll do. What I've been told to do. Eri, just run, Deku sobs, but she steps closer again. You are here to take me back. She knows that's what it is. It can't be anything else. It was never going to be anything else. Right? You'll take me back to him. To overhaul, yes, the man says. It's part of our agreement, you understand. She doesn't, but that doesn't matter. That's not important right now. Then it doesn't matter, she says. What she do? Because no matter what, he'll put me back together. So it doesn't matter. Please don't hurt him. She blinks and she can't see them through the tears. That's probably better. Maybe it will be like shots. Maybe it will hurt less if she doesn't look. You had such bold words before, she hears the masked man say. But look, he's a child with 10 times the backbone you have. Pay close attention, little hero. You might learn something. She blinks again and he stands over her. His hand comes down and she shuts her eyes. It's just like before when the fake Deku tried to take her. It's like a breath of wind against her face, a cry of pain and the sound of a struggle. She opens her teary eyes right as she swept up off the ground. The masked man is no longer there and instead. She's seen him almost as much as she's seen Deku, but not like this, in bright colors and a pretty red cape, not since that first day when she ran barefoot through the streets into Deku's arms. Into safety. He grins at her as he holds her out of the masked man's reach, strong and bright with no trace of fear. Don't worry, Lemillion tells her. I've got this. You go with Deku, all right. She passes from his arms into Deku's and clings once she's there. Deku isn't on the floor anymore, but is on his knees and still shaking while she presses close and watches Lemillion with wide eyes, listens to him tell Deku, take her, get downstairs, there's backup, I'll handle this. The masked man staggers up, and when he talks again he sounds breathless. Well, this has been interesting. But I think it's time I took my leave. And Lemillion grins, all white teeth and shining eyes. Oh, he says cheerfully. Is that what you think is going to happen? That's all she sees before Deku carries her away and out of sight. Then Lemillion is gone, the masked man is gone, the fake Deku is gone, they are running away and there's safety up ahead. It's okay now. They are going to be okay. So why won't Deku look at her? Why is he still crying? It's only with the help of several ghosts that Izuku makes it to the safety of Tagada's promised backup with A. There's no room in his mind for thoughts and directions, and hardly any room in his eyes for seeing the path ahead. When the tears finally blind him, he lets Rei hold on and tow him along, follows her static and the tug of her cold hands. Magno is gone, Arai and the rest of Toga's victims are gone, and there's no sign of any more villains or their ghosts, just Night Eye's people. That is one of two reasons that Izuku doesn't fight and scream when someone tries to pull air from out of his arms. The other reason is that he can feel himself rapidly unraveling. The marble prison still surrounds him, suffocating and small as it closes around him and shuts him in a tiny void. The past few months may as well have been rewound, and is back in Kamina, back in the warehouse, back in the woods, screaming as compress traps him again. He can't fall apart yet, not with air there to see. And what does that matter? Some small part of him thinks viciously. She already saw you fold and cry. She already saw you almost give her up to the enemy without a fight. The back of his throat tastes like bile and rot. His bones feel brittle and his blood is ice water. He doesn't have long. One of the medical staff, not Toda, Izuku checks and double-checks the ghosts nearby, watches Era's father for any sign of distress, finally takes her from him. She clings as she's taken, holding onto his sleeves until there's too much space between them for her arms to reach, and then she's gone and Izuku is alone, shuffled into another vehicle. Bubble Girl is the one who slides in next to him, talks to him as he stares blankly straight ahead. As Night Eye's sidekicks go, Awada Karuruko isn't bad, she's nice and she likes him, and he kind of likes her too. Her quirk is interesting and she's a good hero in every way. She's kind and sweet and her jokes are terrible. There are worse people to fall apart in front of. It's too hard to hear what she's saying through the cotton wool feeling in his ears, so he doesn't try. But he does look at her, and he does ask, is Eri gone? She can't see me. Awada frowns, looks out the car window, and shakes her head. She asks him something else, maybe she asks him if he wants to go see her when things settle, maybe she asks if he wants to ride in the same car with her. No, that's okay, Izuku tries to tell her, but his tongue locks in his mouth and won't let the words through. I just wanted to make sure she couldn't say. The marble prison closes in, and Izuku lets himself crumble. Chapter 55. Everyone and everything converges back on Night Eye's office, and it is only then that he allows himself a heartfelt sigh of relief. The girl is safe, his people are safe, and they have one villain in custody. Midoriya took on Mr. Compress of the League of Villains, who is already being transported to a secure holding facility. Even Centipede is all right, he had been under the influence of some quirk or other when he took ill, and the villains must have used the guard switch as an opportunity to slip in. But it was all for nothing in the end, because the heroes still hold the most important cards. Night Eye learned years ago to cherish the good days when they come. Sometimes they are rare. For the past 6 years they've been rare. And even today is not a total victory. Toga Himiko has slipped through their fingers and they have rock-solid confirmation that Overhaul is in bed with the League. The battle is won and rest of the war looms over them. Upon finding Bubble Girl he asks after his interns and she directs him to the smaller second-floor meeting room. It's an odd place to have put them, he notes vaguely. His sidekick stops him before he goes. Handle it gently, sir, she advises him meekly. They fought hard. He knows that, obviously. Midoriya, for all that is too clever by half, is stubborn to the point of belligerence, and Mirio is, well, Mirio. The fact that Bubble Girl feels the need to tell him this means that something went wrong. He finds them where she said they would be, and takes note of their appearances. Mirio is still in his hero costume. He hasn't changed yet, even though there's been plenty of time since the invasion was thwarted. He's talking quietly to Midoriya, but isn't getting much in response, and when Night Eye looks to his yonder in turn, the room is empty and well out of the way of most foot traffic in the office. Bubble Girl took them somewhere they'd be alone. The look on Midoriya Izuku's face gives him a clue as to why. He sighs lightly. What happened? Mirio confirms his misgivings when he doesn't stand to give his report. He's as respectful and professional as ever, but he stays seated with one hand resting on his junior's shoulders. It's straightforward. Mirio received the alert when he'd just gotten back from his patrol and went straight to help. He found Midoriya and Air cornered by Compress and engaged the villain while Midoriya took the girl and fled to safety. It's the second time they've used that strategy, and Night Eye wonders if he ought to be concerned, but as they say in America, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Thank you, Mirio, he says. Well done with that villain. Midoriya. He tries for a gentler tone than usual because he hasn't seen Midoriya look like this before, and it's a stark reminder of his recent imprisonment by villains. Midoriya takes a deep breath, but only manages a strangled noise. Frustration flashes across his face, and Mirio gives his shoulder a light squeeze. It's okay if you're not up for that, he says. I can translate, remember. Night Eye's eyes narrow in confusion. Translate. It's something he told me earlier, sir, Mirio says. If he's under a lot of stress, he'll go temporarily mute. It's okay, though, we both know sign. He lets go of Midoriya's shoulder and gives him an encouraging smile. Go ahead, I'm ready when you are. Midoriya looks away. Instead of speaking, he signs. Again, it's straightforward in spite of the delivery. Midoriya arrived at the building for his usual visit with Eri after receiving word of the guard switch, and one of the nurses told him that he had already arrived earlier. Realizing that something was wrong, he had hurried to Eri and reached her just in time to find Toda Himiko wearing his face and attempting to lure her away. He retrieved the girl and came very close to subduing the villain before. Night Eye prompts when his interns pause. Midoriya looks at him briefly, then averts his eyes again. Compress showed up, he says, through Mirio. I didn't know he'd be there. Which means his informants didn't have time to warn him, Night Eye thinks. Is there something unusual about Compress, he asks. Midoriya doesn't answer right away. He hands rise and fall, ringing in his lap, but there's nothing for Mirio to translate until finally. I can't fight Compress. I can fight anyone else, just not him. Night Eye frowns again. Like the temporary muteness, this feels like something he ought to have been told earlier. Why not? Another period of hesitation passes, Midoriya's hands shake and curl and uncurl. Night Eye looks to Mirio for an explanation, since it's obvious that he knows what's going on, but his protege's attention is focused on Midoriya. Claustrophobic, Midoriya says fierily. He stops signing for a moment to dig his nails into the knuckles of his other hand. They figured it out in Kamino. Compress used his quirk on me when I didn't behave. Mirio's voice shakes as he translates, and Night Eye shuts his eyes for a moment to rest down his own anger. There's nowhere for it to go, with All for One medically brain-dead and Compress now safely in custody. It's a cold reminder that Midoriya is not always so unflappable. He may be unsettlingly calm in the face of death, but everyone has fears and vulnerabilities. And Midoriya? Well, he knew it was a risk even before he knew about Midoriya's original quirk. Not even the most seasoned heroes can come out of a 4-day imprisonment physically and mentally unscathed, and Midoriya's scars are finally showing through. He just wishes he could have been better prepared to deal with them. I wish you had told me this earlier, he says at length. There are steps that could have been taken to lessen the possibility of something like this happening. You know that, don't you? Midoriya winces. He says out loud with his own voice. I didn't think it'd come up. League wasn't your case. Didn't think I'd run into him. His voice sounds rough, the tone jagged and catching. I believe we went over the possibility of the lead and the precepts joining forces many times, Midoriya. Night Eye sighs again, faintly exasperated. Let this be a lesson, then. You know your own weaknesses. When you deal with villains, you keep them covered or have someone else cover them for you, understand? Now, are there any others I should know about? That's the big one, Midoriya mutters. HM and Night Eye purses his lips. I'm taking you off active duty until further notice. I'll be having a word with your homeroom teacher about this. To ask a Razorhead why he hasn't assigned his students some goddamn therapy for heaven's sake, he thinks. There's not much that can be done about the dead floating around him, but at the very least the boy should talk to someone about his imprisonment. But those are ideas best saved for his future discussion with a Razorhead. For now, he says, you're both dismissed. What about Air? Mirio asks. She's been tended to, Night Eye says. We'll most likely move her to a more secure location and modify our strategy to account for the League as well as the Yakuzas. He stops there because continuing runs the risk of turning it into a discussion, and the day has been long enough. But for now, both of you go home, back to campus, rather. I suggest you take this time to rest and reflect. Thanks, sir. Mirio stands up at last, taking Midoriya along with him. Night Eye waits for them to leave the room before sinking into a chair to ride out his oncoming headache. Izuku slips past his classmates, goes up to his room, and shuts the door behind him. His hands ring at his sides, curling and uncurling as soon as he lets go of the doorknob. He paces restlessly on a steady circuit along the whole length of his room, back and forth on a looping path, driven by restless energy. Ray darts alongside him, following him at first, then moving back to wait for him to finish burning nervous energy. Mika watches him from her spot on his pillow, blinking at him slowly. His phone chimes with a message, interrupting his tangled thoughts and fretful pacing. It's Todoroki, asking if he wants to join the others for a group study session. Izuku's hand wavers over the screen because he should. He really should. Visiting Eri and going on the Oak Patrol with Mirio have taken up so much of his time, and he really should take every opportunity he can to catch up, but some things are more important than homework. He is wasting time there. Digging furrows in his carpet won't fix anything, won't help Air, won't stop the villains, won't make up for his failures today, for freezing up, for almost letting Compress and Toga walk away with Air. Here he is wallowing in his own anxieties when he could be doing any one of those things instead. And he can do them. He can even do all of them if he puts his mind to it, even with Night Eye's orders to stay off duty, and doesn't that sting? He just can't do them alone. Ray, he stops pacing, and she perks up. Could you get everyone together? Tensei, Ms. Nana, Nerida, and Mrs. Kiriyama. Hino, if he'll come. I need to talk to them. Ray nods vigorously and vanishes. Once she's gone, Izuku remembers the text and declines as politely and apologetically as he can. It's probably not enough to keep Todoroki from worrying, but oh well. This is important. There's a little girl on the line, and Izuku almost let her go once already. Tensei is the first to come, then Hino and Ms. Nana. Nerida shows up later, but Ray can't find Mrs. Kiriyama at all. But that's okay. Izuku just needs to start with a few. Is everything all right? Tensei asks. We heard about what happened earlier. Your friends have been worried about you. Yeah, kid, that was a clutch save, but Ms. Nana's voice trails off. I mean, Compress. Izuku winces. Tagada was the one that made the save, he says. If he hadn't gotten there, Eri would be with the League right now. She'd be back with Overhaul. He swallows against a wave of nausea, and his treacherous mind wonders if Overhaul has a medical file on her, recording all the tests and experiments he's done on her to perfect whatever process he's come up with. He shakes himself. He can't afford to think about that. She's still safe, and she'll stay that way if he has anything to say about it. I messed up, he says, and realizes he's cutting off Hino mid-sentence without realizing it. Sorry, what? I said, it's funny that you're saying that when this one says you were the one who called for backup in the first place, Hino says, jerking his thumb at Ray. So what's got your panties in a twist today? I messed up, Izuku repeats. When Compress showed up I was basically useless, and they almost, his voice catches. They didn't, Ms. Nana reminds him. Remember that. They didn't. You did everything right. I know, Izuku says. But it almost wasn't enough, and they'll try again. You all know they will. They'll try and try until they get her back or until they are stopped. I want them stopped. Yeah, that tracks. Hino eyes him warily. So what did you call us here for? I've been stupid, Izuku says. The solution's been so obvious this whole time, and I've been sitting around playing by the rules instead of acting on it. Overhaul's a murderer, just like All for One. And maybe he hasn't lived as long, but he's still killed a lot of people. Izuku balls his hands into fists to keep them from shaking. And that means he's surrounded himself with his own enemies and he doesn't even know it. His Nana's breath is through her teeth as she realizes what he's going to say. I know it's a lot to ask, he goes on, before any of them can interrupt. I know you're not alive anymore, and this isn't really your fight, but there are dead people who do consider it their fight, and I can't get to them. But maybe you can. Oh, Nerida's form shimmers slightly, and Izuku chances a look at his face. The ghost looks eager, and that's a good sign. Ms. Nana, Tensei, you were heroes. And all of you are ghosts. All of you can go anywhere, see and hear anything. You could find them. You could find Overhaul. You could find out where he is, what he's planning, what kind of manpower and resources he has. After today, Night Eye's not letting me back out into the field, and I hate it, but I guess I can't blame him. He takes a deep breath. But I can still help. If you're willing, help me pull it off. I know it's a lot to ask, but... Hey, Hino cuts him off, and Izuku can't help but wince. Eyes up here. Izuku raises his chin and braces himself, only for Hino to smirk at him. You're spinning all this into a big speech, but you said it yourself, we are dead. Do you really think we have anything better to do? Ms. Nana pushes herself ahead of him, looking exasperated. What he's trying to say is, of course we'll help you, Sprout. Honestly, I'm just glad you found a way to keep out of harm's way and nose into someone else's business. So you'll do it? Izuku asks hopefully. It feels like forever since I got to do any real legwork. Tensei grins broadly. I think Tenya will be fine by himself for a little while. Finally, I can do something that matters, Nerida says. You've got yourself a deal, Midoriya. We'll find the bastard and bring you all the dirt on him we can. If you go to where they're keeping Eri, you'll find her dad with her, Izuku tells him. For the first time since this afternoon, excitement thrums back to life in his veins. I think he's lucid enough to tell you where to start looking. If not, the dead are everywhere, Ms. Nana reminds him. We'll spread the word, ask around. We'll find him. Thank you, Izuku says. One by one the ghosts vanish from his bedroom. Rei hesitates for a moment until Izuku motions her to go on, and eventually she disappears as well. Izuku is left standing in an empty room, alone but for Mika napping on his bedspread. He goes to his desk and rifles through one of his drawers until he has a fresh, empty notebook in hand. Ever since Midoriya took him on one of his daily outings, Shadow finds himself worrying less. It's not gone by any means, but it's less. Given how often trouble finds him, it's never going to go away entirely. It's still frustrating, especially with Uraraka, Asui, Kirishima, and Tokoyami on their own internships. That's only a quarter of the class, but it still feels to Shadow like everyone has something to do but him. The fact that Aizawa is periodically out of class on his own mission doesn't help. Present MIC is fine as a substitute, but it's still a harsh reminder of how behind he is. Then Midoriya comes back to the dawns, and Shadow knows almost immediately that something's happened. His first clue is that Tagada is escorting him, hovering over him worriedly until he sees Midoriya off at the door. His second clue is that Midoriya promptly vanishes upstairs without a word to anyone. Tagada leaves without saying much. Shadow sends his friend an invitation to study, hoping to find out what happened, but Midoriya brushes it off and that's the end of that. It's odd, though. Shadow's sitting on the couch when he feels a chill go by, not unlike a draft. It's not a draft, of course, he's felt this often enough around Midoriya to identify it as a dead person he can't see or hear. He goes still, waiting for another feeling, or maybe a sign that something is wrong and Shadow needs to go up and check on Midoriya more directly. But nothing comes. Midoriya comes down later for dinner, with a calm smile on his face that tries to reach his eyes but can't quite make it. The thing is, Ochako has an inkling of what's going on. The dragon heroine Yukio is on the 8 Precepts case, same as Deku's supervisor, so Wood gets back to them when the League of Villains launch an attack on one of Night Eye's secure buildings. It doesn't take a genius to know that Deku was involved somehow. When Ochiko gets the news, it's all she can do to keep from gnawing her fingernails to stumps. Is it bad that she only really gets worried when she finds out he's been taken off duty? It can't be a punishment. She knows Deku, knows how determined he is, and it'd be impossible for him to give anything less than his best, especially when he has ghosts on his side. But something's wrong. It is to be for Deku to be this cagey afterward. He's not going out every day anymore, but it still feels like she hardly sees him, and when she does, he's staring off into space and muttering to himself. She wonders who he's talking to. Tenya has a strong feeling that Tensei isn't around quite as often. He isn't sure why. He isn't sure it's possible for him to know with absolute certainty whether or not his brother's spirit is with him. It's just a feeling he gets, and while his logical side balks at classifying it with such vague terminology, there's no other way he feels comfortable describing it. He's been feeling it just a bit less lately. And that's unfortunate, because something is wrong with Midoriya, and Tenya misses being able to whisper his fears in his empty dorm room while knowing it's not as empty as it seems. His attempts to broach the subject to his friend have been largely unsuccessful, and that's really not fair, because months ago Midoriya was the one to scold him for not asking for help when he was struggling. He's not alone in feeling this way. Todoroki is worried, Uraraka is worried, and Togata-senpai seems worried as well on the occasion that Tenya sees him. But Midoriya won't say anything. Not to them, at least. He's talking to someone, though Tenya sees it all the time, now that he knows that more than half of Midoriya's usual muttering isn't just talking to himself. If he's not doing that, he's scribbling in his notebook. Tenya has no idea what that's about. Midoriya flips it shut whenever anyone wanders within range. Izuku is going over his notes again. Over the past few days, his allies have managed to put together a solid picture of what they are dealing with. Era's father led them straight to the original headquarters where Era was first kept, which was a solid start, but not quite enough. The 8 Precepts group has been pulling out, removing people, supplies, and assets out to a new location, several new locations. Izuku isn't exactly sure how many. When he is, he'll take it straight to Night Eye. He feels the presence in his dorm room without seeing or hearing anything strange. A split second after the feeling touches his senses, Mika stirs in his lap and meows. Izuku turns around in his seat and sees a ghost. Immediately his eyes are drawn to her left shoulder, or the spot where her left shoulder used to be. It's gone now, along with her arm and part of her torso. She carries herself awkwardly, as if the missing pieces have thrown off her balance. "Hello," Izuku says, tearing his eyes from her wounds. "Are you Midoriya?" she asks. In spite of her strange balance and missing parts, she carries herself with an air of poise. She looks to be in her late 20s to early 30s. "That's me. Ingenium sent me," she tells him. "After a fashion. He said you were trying to bring down Overhaul." Izuku pushes his chair out from his desk and turns around to face her fully. "And what if I am?" She nods. "My name is Chusa. Chusa Junko. N. I was a Yakuza." Izuku tenses on instinct, but she shakes her head. "I know how that must sound to you. But if you knew more about what Overhaul has done, you'd know that means I'm on your side here." "I don't understand," Izuku says warily. He's alone right now, all the ghosts are out gathering information. Rei usually checks in pretty frequently, but she isn't here yet. Overhaul's the leader of the Yakuza. Her face crumples. He's a disgrace to the name. And even if he wasn't, a lot of Overhaul's victims are his own men. People who failed him, or people who held too tight to the old ways for his liking. For old ways? Chusa shakes her head. Chisaki Kai was adopted by a boss as an orphan child, raised in the family like the rest of us. And somewhere down the line he got it into his head that he had to rebuild the Yakuzas. And that rebuilding the Yakuzas was worth changing everything that we were supposed to be. She hesitates, hand twisting in the remains of her shirt. A lot of people say the old families are a shadow of what they used to be, and maybe we were. Maybe we are. But it means something. There's honor and integrity in staying true to ourselves instead of becoming villains. She shuts her eyes. We don't take a villain names. That's not what we do. That's not what we are. But Chisaki poisoned the man who raised him like a son, then stole his position and started calling himself Overhaul. It's a disgrace. He killed you for opposing him. Izuku asks. Chusa is silent for a moment. I bought into it, she says at last. I was young, and the things he talked about, reclaiming our former glory, emerging from the shadows, it was nice, you know. I didn't realize what it really meant. But dying opened my eyes. I was loyal to him, I served him well, and he killed me for a single misstep. Just one failure. And I want him to pay. She stands taller. So, I'll help you. If it comes to a battle, I know his usual tactics. I can be your eyes if you'll let me. Cautiously, Izuku nods. I'll take any extra set of hands and eyes. Overhaul's going down. Chusa's face lights up eagerly. I look forward to it. Well then. Izuku smiles. He's not sure which smile it is, the real one or the frightening one. Can you tell me if we are missing any hideouts? The better part of a week passes before Night Eye can get a hold of a Razorhead. The latter has spent most days since the League's attempted capture of Air to dive deep into his usual sources, keeping his ear to the ground and monitoring villain movements every hour that he isn't teaching classes or sleeping. While Night Eye is grateful for his efforts, it can't be healthy and has been impatient to speak to him. As it is, he's a few minutes late to the meeting that Night Eye finally manages to schedule. He walks into Night Eye's office muttering an apology that's little more than a platitude, but Night Eye takes it at face value. When heroes, especially underground heroes, have that frayed sort of look about them, it's better to heckle them as little as possible. For nearly an hour they go over the results of a Razorhead's investigation, and Night Eye is simultaneously thankful for the information and frustrated that there isn't more of it. It's not as concrete as I'd like, the Razorhead tells him, glaring down at his half-empty water glass as if he blames it for his hardships. Mostly rumors and hearsay, and many of them contradict each other. But that's what I could dig up. I was afraid of that, Night Eye says acidly. But it's better than nothing. He places the intelligence report in his hand to the side. If you've nothing more to share, I did want a word with you about Midoriya Izuku. Oh, good. Razorhead sounds almost relieved. Because I have questions. Night Eye frowns. Questions? Well. Razorhead sits forward, letting his elbows rest on the far side of Night Eye's desk. In case you were wondering, the reason I was late today is that a few of my students stopped me on the way out the door to bring up his recent behavior. Technically it was nothing I didn't already know, but it's always nice to have more details. He doesn't like where this is headed. He took the boy off duty to avoid having to worry about him. What sort of behavior? Withdrawing, avoiding socializing, vanishing into his room and refusing to come out, the Razorhead replies. There's been an uptick in avoidance behaviors since Compress and Toga made their move. I'm still hearing him speak, though. At least there's that. He needs counseling for what happened in Kamina, Night Eye says bluntly. The events of last week may have exacerbated the lingering trauma. And by may have, I mean definitely. He sighs harshly. He didn't inform me of his severe claustrophobia before he ended up facing Compress. Razorhead tenses visibly. Maybe you should start from the beginning. He does so. Night Eye isn't one for sugarcoating, and he knows that Razorhead isn't either. He delivers it as he would any report, going through the events of that day one by one, the unexpected change in Sentry Judy, Midoriya's arrival at the secure location, his call for help, and the ensuing battle as best as he can present it when he didn't participate himself. Razorhead's expression doesn't change as he listens. Bubble Girl was good enough to have them wait for me somewhere quiet, Night Eye finishes. When I got to them, Midoriya was temporarily mute and had Miria translating as he gave his report in sign language. I've had him off active duty since. Sending him back out into the field after that would do far more harm than good. Razorhead purses his lips thoughtfully. It explains a lot, but not all of it. He's especially close to a select few of his friends, and if it were only trauma, then he'd be surrounding himself with them, but those few were the ones to tell me he was isolating himself, so unless it slipped your mind to tell him he did a good job, it doesn't make sense. Unless it, Night Eye pauses. Pardon? The underground hero blinks at him, and his eyes narrow. Please tell me it didn't slip your mind. Night Eye stares at him, not sure how to respond to that, and Eraserhead sighs harshly and puts down the glass he's been toying with. It slipped your mind, didn't it? You removed him from active duty and didn't tell him it wasn't a punishment. Night Eye bristles. Why on earth would it be a punishment, he asks. He did everything right. He alerted me as soon as he realized something was wrong, called for backup, and successfully held off the villains until said backup arrived. There's nothing in that worth punishing. Obviously. But forget for a moment that we are both rational minds and remember that we are talking about your former boss's favorite student. Eraserhead ignores Night Eye's sharpened glare. I've been trying to train him out of thinking that success doesn't count unless he does everything by himself, but every now and then he backslides on it. My advice to you is, let me guess, you sent him home and haven't spoken with him since except work emails, right? Night Eye nods, feeling uncomfortably judged. Then talk to him. Take him aside and go over what happened. That kid, well, I won't say he cares too much, because there's no such thing as a hero who cares too much. But he takes on too much by himself. Take him aside and spell it out that he isn't a colossal fuck-up. He did everything he was supposed to do, and if he doesn't give himself a break he'll be no use to anyone. Considering how far you've taken to guard Amiria, I don't think I need to tell you that constructive criticism is useless without positive reinforcement. This conversation is beginning to feel suspiciously like a scolding. I know things are tense and the world is falling apart, but try to remember that you're teaching a kid. No ordinary teenager, Night Eye bites back. He took quite the leap from training someone like Miria to training a boy who's constantly 2 steps ahead because spirits are feeding him lines. Not that Eraserhead would know that. Don't give me that look, Eraserhead says flatly, at the same time as he misinterprets whatever look is seen. You had All Might's ear for 5 years. If anything, you uniquely qualified to deal with Midoriya's self-destructive martyr tendencies. The boy may admire him, but there's a world of difference between the two, Night Eye says, before he can stop himself. I'll speak with him, of course, but it's not that simple. Eraserhead studies him for a moment, with a look on his face like he's just discovered a bit of evidence that he'd missed. Before Night Eye can worry that he's let something slip, there's a knock at his door. Come in, he says, eager for even a momentary distraction. And because he has the worst luck in the world, Midoriya himself steps through, dressed in normal civilian clothes, with nothing but a single notebook tucked under his arm. Upon seeing Eraserhead, he stops short. Sorry for interrupting, he says. I can wait. What is it, Midoriya? Night Eye asks. The sight of him fills him with foreboding, and is not sure if it's the usual dread or something new. I can wait until you're done, Midoriya says. I just wanted to give you something. Something being the notebook in his hands, no doubt. What is that? Eraserhead asks, frowning again. Just notes, Midoriya replies. Notes on what? Night Eye is almost afraid to ask. That's odd, Eraserhead says, raising an eyebrow. Night Eye just finished telling me that you've been off duty all week. Midoriya looks at him with bland, innocent eyes. Oh, well, yes. And I've been staying out of trouble like he said. That's not very reassuring, Midoriya, Eraserhead tells him. Sorry, Midoriya says, backing toward the door. You don't have to worry, though. I haven't left campus all week. That would be convincing, Eraserhead says dryly. If I didn't watch you use that exact tone with Shigaraki to stall him at the USJ. You want to try that again? Midoriya halts in his tracks. Midoriya. Eraserhead prompts. The boy takes a few moments to reply. Night Eye doesn't like the look on his face. He looks unsettled, and the only time Night Eye has seen him look anything but calmly knowing or irritated was last week, while he gave his report in sign. Midoriya's voice cracks. Could you repeat that, Sensei? Eraserhead frowns. You used that same tone when you stalled Shigaraki Tamura at the USJ. It was very impressive, but it also showed me quite a few of your tells. Sensei. Slowly, Midoriya shifts his weight from one foot to the other. His face is frozen blank. Do you remember what happened before I did that? The frown deepens. I don't see how that's, Midoriya, what's the matter? Humor me, Midoriya says. What happened before I stalled Shigaraki? His throat pods as he swallows. You came up to the plaza while I was holding them off. Eraserhead says slowly, chewing over each word. You were there, Midoriya says softly. So why was I the one stalling him? A split second after the question leaves Midoriya's mouth, the glass slips from Eraserhead's hand. The carpeted floor is just enough of a cushion to stop it from breaking on impact. Night Eye is on his feet in an instant, alarmed. Midoriya stares at his teacher, speechless with shock. Eraserhead looks like his life is flashing before his eyes. This doesn't make sense, he says. The Numu, but I remember. Midoriya's eyes flicker to Night Eye for a split second, looking almost apologetic. I stopped Shigaraki from using his quirk on you and Asui, Eraserhead says. He doesn't seem to have noticed the dropped glass. And then the Numu bashed my skull into the floor and I woke up in the hospital. But I remember, I saw you. I talked to you and you talked back. Midoriya is looking at the floor now, spine rigid. What did I say? You told me not to worry. Eraserhead's eyes are fixed on him. That no one had to die. Midoriya. You weren't dead, Midoriya says. He says it abruptly in a rush of words, as if he's forcing it out before he can lose his nerve. Not quite. But you were close. Close enough for me to see you. Eraserhead doesn't answer. I haven't. Midoriya shoots another split-second look at Night Eye. I haven't been honest with you about my quirk. But things are different now, and I should have told you before. His hands curl into fists, and the change that follows is so smooth that Night Eye almost misses it. His stance shifts, the troubled look on his face vanishes, and in an instant he's cold and composed again, the way he always is when his quirk presents itself. I see ghosts, Midoriya says. Spirits of the dead. I've been talking to them a lot lately, that's what the notebook is. After the League almost took error, I figured they'd try again, so I reached out. His mouth is set in a grim line. Overhaul's killed a lot of people, and most of them are happy to help. So I've been asking them things. For information. Where his bases are, how many people he has, what they've been doing, stuff like that. Night Eye sighs harshly. This is his own fault. He hasn't properly considered the implications of Midoriya's quirk, of what he can do with it. You should have discussed this with me first, Midoriya. The boy shrugs one shoulder. I wanted to keep being useful, he says to Night Eye. I've been stupid not to think of this before. When I say he's killed a lot of people, I mean a lot. Overhaul and his men can't blow their noses without at least one of them seeing it. That isn't the point. I'm gonna need you to back up, Eraserhead says. It's hard to place his tone. It's not quite as flat and emotionless as it usually is, but is not angry or upset. There's a quiet intensity to it all the same. You don't believe me, Midoriya says. Do you? Midoriya. That usually happens. The boy turns back to face him. What will it take? Is there anything I can say to you that will make it easier to believe? Eraserhead's frown deepens and Night Eye doesn't blame him. The man has spent the latter part of the meeting defending Midoriya, and now he's forced to place the burden of proof on him for a claim that isn't easily tested. Midoriya's eyes shift away from Eraserhead's face. For a moment he seems to be waiting for something before he looks at his teacher again. I can tell you about the ghosts following you if you want. You might remember Narita if you remember the USJ. Narita Yuta. Eraserhead pauses. I've never met anyone with that name. No, Midoriya concedes. You haven't. You met his sister Kanan. Eraserhead stiffens. You saved her from the serial killer that murdered her brother. He was following his killer and he saw you save her and leave before she had the chance to thank you. There's a worried look in Eraserhead's eyes now. That made the news, he says hesitantly. It would take some digging, but that information is available. What about Kiriyama? Eraserhead breathes and sharply. A bridge was destroyed and her car went underwater, Midoriya continues. You broke through the windshield to get her out, but her seatbelt got stuck. She says she had to hit you to get you to leave her and get her son out of the backseat instead. Eraserhead's knuckles are white. She squeezed your hand before you let her go, Midoriya says. She did it to let you know it was all right and she didn't blame you, but she was never sure you understood. Midoriya. Eraserhead's voice cuts through his and the boy falls silent. That's you can stop there. I believe you. Midoriya falls silent. Waiting. This makes more sense than it should. Eraserhead's dark eyes flick toward Night Eye's face as if checking him for a reaction. I get that a lot, Midoriya answers. The only question this raises, Eraserhead says slowly, is about the quirk that I've been watching you use since I first met you. Midoriya hesitates, but in Night Eye's opinion he doesn't hesitate nearly long enough before he answers, that's a different quirk. I wasn't born with it. All Might gave it to me before I started school. Midoriya, Night Eye says sharply. Night Eye. Eraserhead gets up from his chair. Something's just come up and I'm going to need to cut this meeting short. Remember what I said to you earlier. Sorry to rush out. With that, he leaves. The moment the door is closed, Night Eye turns sharply to Midoriya, only to find him on the phone. Sorry, just a second, I have to warn him, Midoriya says, holding the phone to his ear. Then, hey, All Might, it's me. No, everything's fine. Sort of. I just told Aizawa-sensei about my quirks. Yeah, both of them. I think he's on his way to you, yeah, brace yourself. Good luck. He hangs up. Night Eye opens his mouth to voice his concerns vehemently. I think I should have told him sooner, Midoriya says. Aizawa-sensei's just as involved in teaching me to be a hero as All Might is. I think it'll help in the long run if he knows more about what he's dealing with. Still, Night Eye says tightly. One for All has been a closely guarded secret for generations. Divulging it is not a decision to be made lightly. I've been thinking about it for a while, Midoriya says. And at the end of the day, it's my quirk. It's my decision to make. Right, Night Eye says, trying to force the sound note out of his voice. He doesn't know why he never expected Midoriya to be so cavalier about One for All when he's casual enough with the unsettling implications of his own quirk. Besides, it has to be a little less dangerous now than before, Midoriya says. With All for One being dead and all. I would have assumed that myself, if not for your original quirk, Night Eye points out. Death doesn't mean the same for you as it does for everyone else. How certain are you that All for One won't be dangerous even dead? His brother promised me he wouldn't be a problem. It takes a moment for the implications of that to sink in. You mean you've met? I've met two of my predecessors besides All Might, Midoriya tells him. Ms. Nana and the original, he didn't tell me his name. The rest are already gone. He hesitates for a moment. Can I be honest about something? Why stop now? That's one of the reasons I was frustrated meeting you, Midoriya says bluntly. I never knew how to say it without it sounding arrogant. But it was frustrating that you thought I didn't deserve One for All when I've met 3 people who had it before me and they all thought I was doing fine. Night Eye's not sure what to say to that. He's not sure what he would have said if Midoriya had told him when they first met. Anyway, I just wanted to give you this notebook, Midoriya continues, dropping the object in question on Night Eye's desk. It is everything I've gathered on Overhaul's operation so far. If it's not enough, I can get more out of the ghosts. They're happy to help, and I don't have to go against your no active duty orders to let them. Which, of course, brings to mind what he and Eraserhead had been discussing before Midoriya's arrival, while also making him wonder if there's any point in bringing that up. Seeing as how there are ghosts in the room, he says awkwardly he'll never get used to saying these things out loud. And 2 of them were apparently following Eraserhead. I don't suppose you already know what we were talking about before you arrived. They didn't tell me what you said, Midoriya answers. Just that you had something to talk to me about. Ah. Of course it wouldn't be that easy. Night Eye considers sitting down for this, but decides against it. Midoriya, do you know why I took you off active duty? Midoriya blinks at him, and Night Eye shakes his head. Let me rephrase that. Why do you think I made that decision? For a moment, Midoriya looks trapped. An honest answer, that's all I ask, Night Eye says, clinging to patience. Speak freely. Because of the attack last week, Midoriya says warily. I almost let Air get taken, so you took me off to keep something like that from happening again. Night Eye sighs, equal parts dismayed and exasperated. You did everything you were supposed to do in that situation. I've kept you off active duty so that you could rest and collect yourself, not to punish you. To his annoyance, Midoriya looks skeptical. I thought my intentions were clear last week, he says. Regardless of my feelings regarding One for All's placement, I'm still responsible for you for the duration of your internship. Midoriya averts his eyes. Oh. An awkward silence stretches between them, and Night Eye finds to his frustration that, even with that confusion cleared up, the air still feels tense. But why wouldn't it? Midoriya is no Midoriya, and Night Eye is no All Might. They haven't seen eye to eye for 2 consecutive seconds since this internship started. Something else on your mind? Night Eye asked reluctantly. Midoriya considers him for a moment. No, sir, he says at last, turning back toward the door. You sure about that? Night Eye can feel his patience thinning. If you have more concerns you'd like to express, you might as well take the time now. The boy halts. I don't think there's anything to talk about, he says. And yet you've stopped, and you're talking now. Tension snaps into Midoriya's shoulders, and Night Eye sees him force it out before turning around again. His hands are hidden in his pockets. You don't even like me, he says. His voice is still calm, lukewarm to the point of being dismissive. Ever since I started you've made it pretty clear you don't want me here, and that's fine. I'm fine with just making myself useful until my internship is over. At least then we'll both get something out of this. His petulance has been testing Night Eye's patience all month, but even this is pushing it. Whether or not we get along is irrelevant to the work we do, Midoriya. It comes up every time we talk, Midoriya tells him. So it kind of feels relevant. Night Eye presses his mouth closed. I was under the impression that my opinion of you didn't matter to you, he says. I have done my best to remain professional, but if you find it difficult to do the same. I'm not talking about One for All and whether you think I'm worthy or not, Midoriya says tightly. I know that ship has sailed. I'm talking about the look on your face every time I talk about my own quirk. The indistinct shapes of his hands in his pockets shift as if they are curling into fists. You think I don't notice how much you hate it? I don't hate your quirk, Midoriya actually snorts at this, and Night Eye almost loses his patience entirely. At worst I'm uncomfortable with the attitude it's given you, which, considering your position with All Might and One for All, can really be blind. All Might has nothing to do with my first quirk, he didn't even know I had it when he gave me One for All. Oh yes, I know about that, Night Eye says, more coldly than intended. Do you think it's a point in your favor that you kept something so vital from him when he entrusted his power to you? I get it, Midoriya says tersely. You're scared about the future you saw and you're scared of him dying. I am too. You don't think I get that? Night Eye opens his mouth, then shuts it again. Midoriya's face changes. His sulky frown blanks out on his face. He stops short. What, you don't think I get it? Is that what you're saying? If he were a more sensible man, he would end the discussion here and dismiss the boy. But the past weeks of tension and niggling have frayed his restraint to the snapping point. I'm sure it concerns you, Night Eye says quietly. In your own way. What's that supposed to mean? Do you really want me to answer that, Midoriya? Did I stutter? Night Eye sighs. He's going to regret this, he just knows it. It's the nature of your quirk, isn't it, he says wearily. All Might may die, but knowing him, his spirit would remain. So what would you really lose in the end? He pauses for an answer, and when he doesn't receive one, continues. It's not something I blame you for. I don't fault your conscience. It's merely the nature of your quirk, and it can't be helped. But it's troubling all the same. And with that, it's out. It should be a relief to finally let the weight off his chest, but it only makes him feel cold. Midoriya's face shifts through at least a dozen different emotions before finally settling upon cold shock and fury. That's why you hate me so much. You think I don't care? Midoriya, I don't. No, I've spent my entire life talking to ghosts, and you think I don't care when people die, you think I don't lose anything. You think people die and I'm just fine with it. His hands are out of his pockets, fists trembling at his sides. What the hell do you think makes a ghost in the first place? Night Eye opens his mouth to reply, to try to defuse this situation, but no sound will come out. The temperature in the room has dropped to sub-zero, goosebumps prickle over his flesh, and he finds that his voice will not obey him. The cold composer of before is gone, scrubbed away to leave behind something open and raw and festering. Do you think people leave ghosts behind when they die at a ripe old age in their sleep? They don't. His voice scrapes and cracks like broken glass over pavement. They die young, and they die scared and angry and alone, and most of them don't get to leave pretty corpses behind. That's my life, sir. It's been my life since I was 3 years old, and every time I open my eyes and see another walking corpse, I get reminded of how many people don't get saved every day, and it sucks, and I hate it. His voice breaks. I hate that they are scared, and I hate that they are in pain, and I hate that I'm the only one who can do anything about it, and sometimes I can't do anything about it. He breaks off, and the cold pressure on Night Eye's throat is gone, but for the life of him he can't think of anything to say. It's hard to think of things to say in the face of a crying child. I didn't come to you because I wanted your approval, Midoriya says. I didn't come because of One for All, or because of All Might. I came because I see things I wish I could forget, and I know things nobody else should know, and I can't make it go away because they're people and they need my help and no one knows about them but me, because no one else has to see the things I see. And he stops again, fighting against his own tears. And I'm here because I thought maybe you'd understand. Night Eye feels his heart plummet. For a moment, the boy tries to steady himself, to pull together some semblance of his former composure. It doesn't work. After the third try, he gives up and draws his sleeve sharply across his eyes, as if furious with himself for losing control. I did all of this wrong. I'm sorry. Once this internship's over, I won't bother you again. He turns toward the door. Midoriya, Night Eye starts. The door shuts behind him. It's instinct, not foresight, that makes Night Eye duck. Something whistles over his head, narrowly missing him, and he straightens up just in time to see a snow globe shatter against the wall. Chapter 56. Afternoon has turned to early evening by the time Shouder catches sight of Midoriya walking back to the dorms. It's actually hours after he should have been back. Midoriya texted him a while ago to let him know that he had fallen asleep on the train and missed his stop. That, and the periodic updates Midoriya had sent on his way back, is the only reason Shouder hasn't raised any alarms. And so, against all odds, his student has come back in one piece, with no sign of him getting into a fight while Shouder wasn't looking. He is, however, holding a plastic bag from a corner store, and Shouder doesn't recall any mention of the grocery run in Midoriya's updates. He's about to point this out when he sees the look on Midoriya's face. With a sigh, he intercepts his student before he gets to the door. Get those squared away, and then come back, he says. I'd like a word. If it were anyone else, he would expect nervousness. But Midoriya simply nods and disappears inside. Shouder takes him to one of the lounge areas in the teacher's dormitory. It's mostly empty, except for All Might sitting stiffly on one of the couches, and Snipe, who sees Shouder coming and quickly excuses himself. Unlike the students' common rooms, this area is easily closed off for the sake of privacy. They are going to need it. All Might sits up a little straighter when he sees Midoriya coming, which is a departure from how cowed he's looked since this afternoon. Shouder doesn't regret any of what he said, but he'd rather All Might didn't keep cringing at him like he thought Shouder was going to start up that discussion again. He's said his piece, what's done is done, and it's time to move forward now that they are all relatively on the same page. What happened after I left Night Eye's office? Shouder asked bluntly, once they are all settled and alone. With that single question, he has All Might's full attention. Midoriya shrugs. He won't look at either of them. I stayed a little longer and Night Eye sent me home, he says. Then I fell asleep on the train and missed my stop. That's what your text messages said, Shouder replies. Want to tell me what actually happened? This time, Midoriya thinks his answer over before he offers it. Just a misunderstanding, he says. It's cleared up now, so there's no point in worrying about it. Am I in trouble for being late? That entirely depends on why you were actually late, Shouder says. Midoriya doesn't answer. I'm bound to find out eventually. You might as well save us both the time. He frowns. I was discussing your internship with Night Eye before you arrived. If you're having problems... If I was having problems, it wouldn't matter since my internship's almost over anyway, Midoriya tells him. Also, you didn't have to yell at All Might for hiding my quirk. He didn't know about it until a month ago. Shouder raises his eyebrows. It's an abrupt subject change to show off a bit of knowledge Midoriya shouldn't have. If Shouder didn't know better, he'd say Midoriya was trying to throw him off on purpose. If you know that much, then you'll know that my main point of contention was his failure to tell me, the person responsible for teaching you and evaluating your abilities, that you were coming to school with a quirk that you'd had for all of 2 months. I can guarantee that I would have adjusted your education accordingly had I known from the beginning. It turned out fine anyway, Midoriya says. Shouder zeroes in on Midoriya's scarred hand, sharply enough that he knows the boy is following his gaze. I beg to differ. In any case, it's not a mistake I'll be making again, which is why you're here right now. It's easy to get to Midoriya's level when he's sitting. I want to know as much about your quirks as I can, and I do mean both of them. All Might has already told me about the one he gave you. I want to hear about the one you grew up with. I told you everything at Night Eye's office, Midoriya says. I see ghosts, I make them stronger, and with one for all I can make them visible. There's not much besides that. It's not on any of your records, Shouder says. As far as I can tell, you were registered as quirkless until you were 15. Hard to get registered for a quirk nobody believes is real, Midoriya says flatly. Then I take it you haven't seen a quirk counselor about it? Shouder asks. Midoriya stops avoiding his eyes and actually looks at him, surprised by the question. What? All children with quirks go through mandatory quirk counseling in grade school, Shouder says patiently. Without a registered quirk, you were excluded, correct? Yes, Midoriya says. But have you spoken to a quirk counselor at all about it? Shouder asks. Midoriya's face scrunches up in thought. Sort of. Elaborate. I mean, he was a quirk counselor, Midoriya says. I don't think his license was still valid when I talked to him. He lost his license? Shouder asks. No, he died. Shouder closes his eyes and counts to 10. Let's back up for a moment. Ask a stupid question. What happened with this particular ghost? All Might asks as Shouder tries to get his thoughts together. Oh, he's long gone now, Midoriya answers readily. I met him when I was 8, a little after I moved schools. I don't really know where he came from, he just showed up one day and started doing counseling sessions with me. He didn't know he was dead, so he was just doing what he was used to, and since I was the only kid who was answering him when he talked, he treated me like a patient. That's rather unconventional, All Might says. Midoriya gives him a what do you expect sort of shrug. It did help in the end, he says. I mean, I think he did a good job. Shouder frowns. How so? Well, ghosts are, they were, Midoriya stops. They are just scary sometimes, he says lamely. Especially for me, at that point. I was stuck with this quirk that nobody believed I had. I couldn't turn it off. I couldn't make myself not see it. And it was hard. It felt like I was spending every day surrounded by monsters that nobody else could say. Any one of them could hurt me if they wanted, and nobody would be able to do anything about it, and that scared me. Shouder has a lot of thoughts. He doesn't voice any of them, but nods for Midoriya to continue. They'd show up all the time, without any warning, Midoriya says. They'd try to talk to me, or grab me. Sometimes they'd go after me if I ran. I hated it, and there was no way to make it stop. But then Karasu-sensei changed things. He pauses, hands tangling in his lap. He asked me what they wanted. What they wanted? All Might echoes. I didn't know they wanted anything, Midoriya says. I never thought about it, and it never occurred to me to ask. So I started asking, and it turned out a lot of them did one things. They weren't trying to hurt me. They were trying to ask for help. With what? Shouder asks. Nothing bad, usually, Midoriya answers. Finding things, passing on messages, stuff like that. But that's not important. He pauses, hair falling into his eyes. When I knew how to help them, it was a lot easier to see them as people instead of monsters. So a cat doing it. He takes a deep breath. And that's the real reason why I was late. A ghost needed a favor. Midoriya. I didn't go far, just a few of stops down. He lost his wallet. Midoriya averts his eyes and fidgets again. It helps me to be helpful. It made my quirk less scary and more normal. And now, when I'm being helpful, everything feels less scary and overwhelming. It works with helping living people, too. Well, I've heard of worse coping mechanisms All Might offers. Midoriya half smiles at that. Anyway, that's the closest I ever got to seeing a quirk counselor. Karasu-sensei finally figured out he was dead, too, which helped a lot of things. It helped him to know that he was dead. All Might asks. He thought he was going through a rough patch in his marriage, Midoriya says. When he found out his wife was only ignoring him because she couldn't see him, it took a lot of weight off his mind. His eyes flicker toward Shouder's face, wary and watchful, as if keeping a close eye on all of Shouder's reactions. He looks like he's waiting for the other shoe to drop. Shouder isn't sure what his student expects from him, but it probably isn't anything good. One last question, he says. Does anyone else know? My mom, Midoriya says. Ida, Uraraka, Todoroki, and Bakugo. And Sir Night-Eye. Shouder sighs, setting aside his annoyance that several students have been notified beforehand. Here's what's going to happen, Midoriya, he says. Tomorrow I'm making sure Ida and Yara Rosa know to put you on extra classroom duty for your unauthorized excursion today. In the future, if you have any pressing ghost-related issues that need resolving, you will notify me first. If you have any further developments in your quirks, and I do mean either of them, you will notify me as soon as possible. That goes for both of you. He shoots All Might a sharp look. I want open communication from now on, and I won't compromise on it. If that's too much to ask, then you should probably find a different place to learn. All Might splutters, but Midoriya just looks relieved. I'm fine with telling you everything, he says. I'm sorry I didn't do it sooner. I don't care one way or the other if you're sorry. Shouder gets up from his seat. Don't ever hide these things from me again. Training from an ignorant teacher with false knowledge about your abilities is worse than no training at all. He holds Midoriya's gaze for a moment longer until he's satisfied that his student isn't shining him on. All right, then. Go on, back to your dorm. Get some sleep. Midoriya complies without any fuss, and Shouder can only hope for the best, at least for now. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it have a good night's rest. You didn't press him on what happened with Night-Eye, All Might says, once Midoriya is out of earshot. Today has been a day for frankly unprecedented honesty from him, Shouder says dryly. I'm not about to press my luck and risk having him shut down again. I'll keep an eye on the situation. He sits down with a heavy sigh. I had a feeling he'd be the problem child of the class, you know. I just never realized how much. All Might opens his mouth to reply, but a whisper cuts him off. Shouder doesn't recognize the voice, only barely registers it as a woman's, warm and amused. The best ones always are, wouldn't you agree? When he glances at All Might, confused, the other man looks as if... well, he looks as if he's seen a ghost. Night-Eye mentioned hell freezing over when they last met, but the last thing Toshinori ever expects is to look down at his running phone and see his old friend's name on the incoming call screen. Pure, habit-driven instinct has him answering before his thoughts reach his hand. If Night-Eye calls, then he has to answer, he has to know what's wrong, he has to help. He forces those feelings down. Night-Eye hasn't called him for something like that in a long time. Silence meets his slightly stammered greeting. This is unusual. Night-Eye prefers not to waste time when making phone calls. He was like that even before their falling out. At last, Toshinori hears a quiet breath, then... Yagi. Toshinori's pulse jumps. It's the name, to start, a middle ground between the formality of addressing him by his hero name and the closeness of first-name basis they once shared. Since he first got in touch with Toshinori to inform him about Midoriya, Night-Eye has been polite. He hasn't been hostile, but his every word has pressed distance between them. Toshinori doesn't blame him. He set that distance himself by walking away 6 years ago. He is no one to blame for that but himself, which doesn't make it hurt any less. But in 2 syllables, Night Eye brings back the open, raw emotion that he let show the last time they spoke face to face. It's not a happy emotion, but... Is something wrong? There must be something wrong for Night Eye to sound like this when speaking to him instead of aloof and formal. If it's not too much of a bother, Night Eye says, can we talk? Toshinori knows better than to press him for details over the phone. Of course, he says, and to his own ears he sounds pathetically hopeful. Their last conversation didn't end the way he would have wanted, but maybe now. I'm free right now, if that's best. It's technically true. It's a school day, but Toshinori isn't scheduled for any classes today. Where would you like to meet? Silence meets his question again. Then, I could come to you. Are you sure? He would have thought things aren't even close to back to normal. They've played it safe by phoning each other from a distance or choosing neutral ground. I honestly don't care where we meet, Night Eye says wearily. I just want to talk. This has something to do with whatever happened yesterday. It had to be something. Izuku has dodged every question about it, but Toshinori knows that something shook him enough make break school rules for a coping mechanism. Something went wrong and now Night Eye wants to talk. The hope that rises within him is sweet and merciless. You could come around to UA, he offers. I'll arrange a visitor's pass for you. Give me a few minutes and I'll call you back. Thank you, Night Eye says, and sounds like he means it. A quick call to Nezu secures him the pass, and he calls Night Eye back to tell him he's clear to come, though he's fairly sure Night Eye is already on his way. He never did like to waste time. I'll meet you outside the south side gate, Toshinori tells him. It's closest to the faculty dorms. The other teachers don't get in until late, so we won't be disturbed. Is there any chance of us running into students along the way? Night Eye asks. Maybe some upperclassmen. On a hunch, Toshinori adds, if you're asking about young Midoriya specifically, then no. He's on classroom duty today, so he's not likely to be wandering around. Ah. Good. Good? Night Eye sighs. We didn't part on a good note yesterday. If he were to see me now, it would only be an intrusion. I'd rather avoid that. I see, Toshinori says with a sinking heart. Well, I'll see you soon, then. He hangs up, sets the coffee maker in the faculty dorm's shared kitchen, and heads out to wait. Night Eye has no right to be here. He's not being dramatic when he thinks that being here, in Toshinori's presence, in his space, is a privilege and not a right. If he hadn't lost that right before, then he certainly has after yesterday. If he'd been more clear-headed, he would have done what Toshinori had done and picked out somewhere comfortable and neutral for both of them. But that's the problem, isn't it? He's not clear-headed. It feels more and more like he hasn't been in a long time. The only thing he's sure of is that Toshinori helps, and Night Eye loses nothing by asking. Things aren't all right. Night Eye isn't all right. And the best cure he's ever known for not being all right is talk to Toshinori. Night Eye does his best to make things better for others, to keep spirits up and leave people better than he found them. He gives his all and still falls short, while Toshinori has always done it without even trying. And so, here he sits with a mug of freshly brewed coffee, looking across the table to his former friend and wondering how to tell him about his colossal failure. Night Eye. I fucked up, Night Eye says and winces. Oh, Toshinori says, blinking in surprise and a little bit of dread. Days ever you. What? It's not important, Toshinori says, shaking his head. What happened, Night Eye? I know that Izuku was upset about something when he got back yesterday, but he wouldn't say why. That ought to be a boon that Toshinori doesn't know. It means this is the first he's hearing about it, and Night Eye can control the narrative if he wants. But that's not why he's here. He needs help, not validation. He needs the truth, no matter how unpleasant, and he can only have that if he offers it first. So he does. He picks it out, piece by piece, and lays it bare at Toshinori's feet. Toshinori's eyes are closed by the time he's finished. Oh, Night Eye, he says. He doesn't sound angry, as Night Eye had feared. He just sounds disappointed, which is somehow even worse. What did you think was going to happen? I don't know, Night Eye admits. I don't know what I was thinking. I can only conclude that I wasn't. He covers his face with his hand, pushing his glasses aside to massage the bridge of his nose between his thumb and forefinger. You were right, Toshinori, I didn't understand. He winces when he realizes what he just said, the name had slipped out so easily. Toshinori, at least, doesn't seem to notice. I should have told you, he says quietly. I told his mother I'd be willing to lay down my life for Izuku if necessary, Night Eye flinches. And she made me swear that I wouldn't. I spoke to her again after he told me the truth about his quirk. She said that dying was the cruelest way I could possibly hurt him. He purses his lips with disapproval. Did you bother to ask him about his quirk before you threw out accusations like that? No anger, only cold disappointment. Night Eye grinds his teeth as the knife in his belly twists, but he doesn't complain. He doesn't have the right to when this whole mess was entirely avoidable. What do you want me to say? He bursts out. That I hurt and belittled a boy that I was supposed to be helping. That I've been terrified and angry for the past 6 years and I took it out on him. That's what happened. His throat threatens to close off. I can't justify that. I don't have any excuse. I don't want an excuse. I want to make it right. He stops, then, leaning on the table in front of him more heavily than he was before. He's tired, he thinks. He's been tired for years, and now he's starting to wonder if Midoriya Izuku is even the first person he's made to suffer for it. That boy means a lot to you, he says. Doesn't he? Even without looking at Toshinori's face, Night Eye can feel the weight of his attention. How much does Tagada Miria mean to you? How is he supposed to answer that? How is he supposed to describe the feeling of teaching someone, of dipping his hands in and helping to shape someone's future? How can he possibly put that kind of raw relief and catharsis into words? Toshinori must take his silence as an answer because he laughs softly at whatever expression is on Night Eye's face. I always thought you'd make a good mentor if you put your mind to it, he says. Glad to know I was right. I don't feel like one at the moment, Night Eye says, still staring down at his coffee. Before he knows it, Toshinori's hand is stretching into his line of vision, covering one of his. None of that, now, Toshinori says, gently stern. Self-flagellation won't help anyone, least of all young Midoriya. Believe me, I should know. Night Eye reluctantly raises his eyes to Toshinori's face, questioning. Remember when I mentioned déjà vu? Well, I was an utter novice of a teacher when I took him on, and I still consider myself a novice now. You think I haven't made my own mistakes? I let him injure himself repeatedly while he was learning how to control One for All. Several times now, I've forced him to work with someone who hurt and abused him in the past. I didn't know that at the time, but there was ample warning that I either didn't notice or actively ignored. Night Eye thinks back to a conversation with Miria about teenage boys doing their best and feeling alone. He wants to prove himself but is also desperate to find someone who understands what he's going through. He had asked for Miria's input from his own mouth and then brushed it off a moment later. How do I fix this? He asks. Be better. Toshinori gives his hand a squeeze. Be better than you were before. Everything you just told me about how wrong you were and how much you regret it and wish you'd done it differently. Tell that to him and then honor your own words. That's all you can do. Right. It's obvious. Or at least it should have been obvious. Maybe if he'd been thinking straight instead of slipping into self-flagellation, he would have come to that on his own. Right, sorry, I don't know why I didn't think of that myself. Toshinori sighs. He doesn't sound disappointed anymore. You always did get lost in your own head when things went wrong. I guess I haven't changed much. When he says it out loud, it feels distressingly true. Sorry to disappoint. I'm not proud of how I've been living these past years, either, Toshinori says. Night Eye hears the olive branch and knows it for what it is. He's not sure that it would be right to accept it after all this time, but I think we were each other's impulse control back then. He hates this, hates the feeling of walking on eggshells around someone he used to know so well. Between my habit of overthinking and mine of not thinking at all, Toshinori finishes for Hen. His hand doesn't leave Night Eye's. It's been a while, hasn't it? Since we last did it this. The talking. It always helped before. The memory squeezes Night Eye's chest like a vice. It did, he says, and the simple truth eases the pain. I've missed it. I know, it's my own fault, but... Toshinori's hand squeezes his again. I wasn't listening. Night Eye looks up at him, surprised. I got caught up in my own head, in my own fear and despair, and I was so terrified of no longer being useful that I stopped listening to reason. I stopped listening to you. His voice trails off. I stopped listening. A short, breathless whiz of laughter escapes Night Eye. Yes. I think I did all of that, too. He'd left, after all. Midoriya Izuku hadn't meant any of it at the time, but there had been some truth to it. He'd left, and he'd been too prideful to try to reach out on his own without pulling together some grand gesture, like finding a successor for him. Toshinori purses his lips. I don't know if I ever held that against you, but for whatever it's worth, I forgive you, he says. Whether or not you forgive me is your business, but I'd like it very much if you could forgive yourself. Night Eye doesn't know what to say to that. It's far too gentle for what he came here expecting. He's so caught up in trying to come up with a response that he doesn't notice Toshinori get up until his old friend is already next to him, drawing him into a hug. As easily as if the past 6 years never happened. For Night Eye's part, it's as awkward and borderline frightening as the first time he ever did it. Of course, Toshinori goes on, without letting go. That's just where I'm concerned. He said something very hurtful to Izuku, and is not as good at hiding it as he thinks he is. If you don't make things right with him, or if you don't even try, well, I'm not sure I could forgive that. So keep that in mind. I'll talk to him, Night Eye promises. Good. It's frightening how much he'd forgotten how to feel safe. Chusa Junko is a lifesaver. The fact that she's a villain, former villain, isn't too much to get past. Okumura was one, too, and there were many others besides. Villains die just like everyone else, they have regrets just like everyone else, and Chusa puts hers to good use. With her help, Izuku has a better idea of how Overhaul's operation works, and that means he can go out and ask better questions. She's not the only dead Yakuza underling unhappy with the current regime. There are plenty of malcontents who are only too happy to offer up information on Overhaul, his circle, and their current plans. Thank you for trusting me, Chusa tells him one day, as he compiles more information to deliver to Night Eye. Thank you for helping me, he answers. And for helping Eri. The ghost hums quietly. It's strange, spending time around people like you. People like me. Izuku asks. People who care about little girls like Eri, Chusa says. People who would risk so much, just for the sake of a single child. No child deserves to grow up in pain and fear, Izuku says, turning back to his knights. One of the many reasons I'm going to be a hero. It's not about what's deserved, Chusa says. It's about what matters in the grand scheme of things. A single child in a big, rotten world. Well, that's what a person is, isn't it? A world, Izuku says, closing his notebook. He has permission from Aizawa to pay a visit to Night Eye's agency. If he hurries, he can make the early train. Memories and thoughts and feelings. Hopes and dreams and stuff. So if I save one person, it's like I'm saving a whole world. Imagine saving a whole world's worth of people, then, Chusa muses. That's the plan. Izuku heads out the door. I mean it, though. Thank you. I don't know if I could have gotten this much without you. The ghostly woman smiles. It's worth it, she tells him. I never thought I'd ever have a chance to make things right. The trip to the agency is uneventful. Too soon, Izuku finds himself walking into the familiar building, steeling himself for an awkward, hopefully brief conversation. He means to leave his notes on Night Eye's desk and leave, so of course, as he's turning away, Night Eye says, just a moment. Izuku tries not to sigh. Ray gives Night Eye's desk light a casual swipe, making it flicker violently. Izuku can see Night Eye give a quick glance around, as if looking for the ghost responsible for it. Yes, sir. He says, a little reluctantly. He wants to leave. He's still mortified about the last time they spoke. It takes surprisingly long for Night Eye to start speaking again. His hands are clasped in front of his face, his eyebrows drawn together in a pinched frown. More than once Izuku sees him open his mouth, close it again, and keep frowning. He's considering the pros and cons of simply backing out and leaving when Night Eye finally speaks. There are things that he stops. What I mean to say is it's difficult to explain 2 false starts, then a third. Izuku sneaks a glance at Rei. She looks less than impressed. I owe you an apology, Night Eye says at last. Don't hurt yourself, Izuku says dryly, then winces at his own loose mouth. Stupid comments at least half the reason things ended up the way they did. So he's a little surprised when Night Eye kind of laughs. It's only kind of, not a real laugh with happiness behind it, just a quiet huff of breath with something like bitter amusement. But it's also a far cry from the unimpressed silence from the first day they had met. It isn't a laugh, but it isn't not a laugh either. I suppose I deserve that, Night Eye says. Oh, hell, this is actually happening. Sir, you don't have to. I do, actually, Night Eye says firmly. I really do. It's difficult for me not because you don't deserve it, but because I honestly don't know where to begin. Look, it doesn't matter, okay? Izuku averts his eyes. It's not like I told you why I picked you for an internship. That was my fault. This isn't about what you wanted from me or my ability to read between lines, Night Eye tells him. This is about, he stops again, eyes closed. This is about you deserving better from me in general. Not as a supervisor. Not even as a question of professionalism. Just basic decency. What does any of this have to do with basic decency? Because Night Eye stops, clapping down on what may be a flash of temper or embarrassment or... Izuku isn't sure. He doesn't have Rei's empathy quirk. The hero's fingers drum on his desk until the sudden flare of emotion comes again. I have not dealt with you fairly, Midoriya. I have been dead set against you from the start, and I have been more focused on proving a point than making your internship useful for either of us. Proving it to whom, I have no idea, but that's not important. He shakes his head. I've been taking 6 years of unresolved conflict out on you, and that was wrong. You deserve far better, and it shouldn't have taken so much for me to see what I was doing. It should never have gotten that far. Izuku stares at the floor as Night Eye falls silent, and he realizes distantly that it's probably his turn to say something. He wishes he knew what. It's not that his mind is blank, just that he's too busy squirming with discomfort to think of the proper response. He's still not used to grown-ups with pulsers apologizing to him and meaning it. Maybe he never will be. At last, he offers a thanks. It's thanks. He can't say it's okay, because it's not. But Night Eye's sorry, and maybe he's even not going to do it again, and that's a little better than having to grit his teeth and put up with bad blood like he's been doing. Night Eye nods, clears his throat, and shuffles through some papers on his desk. I did have something else to discuss with you, he says. When I first put you on leave, I did specify a set period of time, which is coming to an end soon. Izuku stands a little straighter. I can go back to active duty. His internship is nearing its end, but it's better late than never. Provided you pass a psych evaluation first, Night Eye says. For your own good, more than anyone else's. That's fair, Izuku says, hiding his reluctance. Night Eye levels a steady stare at him. His earlier awkward humility is gone. You sure? After what happened with Compress, I wouldn't blame you for needing more time. More time, as if Izuku has been sitting around twiddling his thumbs since he got taken off active duty. As if Night Eye doesn't know perfectly well that he hasn't. I'm sure, he says. I want to see this through. Night Eye holds his gaze for a moment more before nodding. I'll let Eraserhead know, then. Aizawa-sensei. Most experienced underground heroes are trained to give such evaluations, Night Eye says. And it will make things a great deal less complicated if we are all on the same page regarding quirks. Understood. Izuku hesitates. Thank you, Sir Night Eye. His eyes flicker toward the empty spot on the shelf in the far corner. Sorry about your snow globe. Night Eye waves off the apology and sends him on his way. Well, that could have gone a lot worse, Nana says, a little too brightly. Considering where it started. He didn't say anything about what I said before, Izuku muses, clipping on an wireless earpiece so he won't get weird looks from the other train passengers. How do you mean? About why I picked him, Izuku says. What I wanted his help with. Ah. Nana nods. You expected him to offer to make up for it. Invite you to ask for his advice on how to deal with seeing things no one else can. I don't know if I expected it. Izuku purses his lips. Did you want him to offer? No, Izuku says decisively. Definitely not. It would have been weird. After everything that's happened. I don't know, I can't just talk about that with him. That would be delving into some very heavy, very personal business, and Izuku can't. He just can't, not with Night Eye. It's one thing to talk to Todoroki, who exudes security like an aura, or All Might, who's shared secrets with him from the start, or even Aizawa-sensei, who's been as steadfast and trustworthy a teacher as Izuku ever could have hoped for. Night Eye isn't any of those things. Yet, a small voice suggests. Well then, Nana says with a smile. There you are. Sir Night Eye's a lot of things, but he isn't stupid. He's bound to realize all that, and after everything that's happened, he'd be an arrogant idiot to try to push forward anyway. She drapes a pale arm over Izuku's shoulders, squeezing lightly. If I were in his position, I'd let you set the pace, so maybe that's what he's doing. Go at your own speed. Or don't go at all, your internship's almost over, and then you'll never have to talk to him again if you don't want to. You have time to decide, kiddo. That's the most comforting thing Izuku has heard all day. I need you to understand something, Shada says as he signs off on Midoriya's psych evaluation. His students as flicker down to the forms as if double-checking to make sure he really has passed and Shada really is approving it. He meets Shada's eyes again warily. I don't like this, Shada goes on. If I could have my way, you wouldn't be directly involved in what comes next. He knows a little of what Night Eye has planned, and it's not a bad plan, Night Eyes never are, but it is a dangerous one. You would have more time off from field work and proper counseling. The boy winces. But, Shada continues wearily. I know you too well. He braces himself for a snide remark, maybe something about how he didn't know Midoriya nearly as well as he thought he did, but Midoriya stays silent. You were taken off duty by your supervisor, and your response was to follow his orders to the letter and still involve yourself so deeply in this mess that I genuinely wouldn't know how to start extracting you from it. Midoriya has the nerve to suppress a smile at this. I'm in a tough position now, Shada tells him. I always know that I can't protect my students from the world, but you have access to a world that I can't even touch. For all I know, if I were to deny you this, they could give you a dozen different ways to go behind my back and put your safety on the line anyway, and I'd be helpless to stop you. So, to save us both the trouble, I'll clear you for field work, and make sure that when you inevitably start summoning ghosts, you're at least somewhere I can keep an eye on you. He slides the forms across to Midoriya and holds his gaze for a moment. Got it, problem child. Sir Night Eye stands before a meeting room crowded with heroes. His own sidekicks are present, as well as Mirio and Midoriya. Seated beyond them are the rest of his growing operation. Eraserhead slouches in his seat close by. Fat Gum is there with two of his own interns, Mirio's friend Sunita, and Red Riot, who made a name for himself apprehending a man wielding both the trigger drug and Overhaul's quirk-canceling serum. Yukio the Dragon Heroine is here as well, with her interns Uravity and Froppy, two of UA's Bright's up-and-comers. All in all, a decent showing from UA's hero students past and present. The time for waiting and planning is rapidly drawing to a close. The information from both Night Eye's usual channels and now Midoriya confirm it. Part of Night Eye dreads the inevitable clash, and an equal part of him is relieved that it will soon be over, one way or another. He's been outlining their situation for the past 20 minutes, and the faces watching him hold nothing but determination for the task ahead. He wouldn't have chosen these people otherwise. The problem is that Overhaul's factions are growing in reach, he says. They may not have the social power they once did, but they do have connections and access to vital information. That's the hazard of an enemy that falls out of the public consciousness and survives underground. What's more, their alliance with the League of Villains is confirmed, and while All for One is no longer in the picture, we still don't know what resources they've retained. Meaning they'll eventually find out where we're keeping the girl, the hero Rocklock says. He's been tense for the whole meeting, and Night Eye doesn't wonder why. The man has a baby at home, after all. Wrong, Night Eye says. They already know. At this point her greatest defense is that they can't reach her. But our sources indicate that Overhaul is amassing what power he does possess and positioning his pieces around her location. We are doing our best to keep him away from the most strategic positions, but in regards to his making a move to recapture air, it's a question of when, not if. Night Eye presses his glasses back into place. In fact, it's not even that, and more. Sources that I can't name have narrowed down the date on which he'll attack. Spies who can only be detected by one person are terrifyingly useful. They are very lucky that Midoriya Izuku is devoted to being a hero. Let me guess, Eraserhead says flatly. This means we can't move her, either. Night Eye nods grimly. Not without risking open war in the streets. And besides, if we move her then it gives them an opportunity to follow and eventually find the next place we hide her, and the next, the line of his mouth tightens. Please keep in mind. This is a child. A 6-year-old girl. To spend her childhood locked away or on the run, that is no way to grow up. This stops here, and it stops now, while we have enough information to counter their invasion. Here, here. Fat Gum calls out. A few others echo the cry. That's all very well, Yukio says. But how exactly do we plan on countering it? If his forces are spread out, then attacking them all at once seems difficult without risking them communicating with each other. Her eyes narrow. The two-pronged strategy at Kamino was complicated enough, and we all know the price that carried. 3 interns went Midoriya, Kirishima, and Uraraka. Yukio must not know that her own intern was involved more directly in Kamino than she ought to have been, or else she might not have spoken of it so lightly. We won't be launching an attack, Night Eye said. Overhaul will. Right into a trap of our own making. Silence falls over the room as the gathered heroes mull over his words. The only one who doesn't look thoughtful is Midoriya, doubtless because he already knows exactly what Night Eye is talking about. Wait, Rocklock says, eyes narrowing. Are you telling me we are setting a trap for villains and using a little girl as bait? I'm saying that we are mounting a defense instead of an offense, Night Eye tells him. The villains will come, that much is clear. But thanks to our intel, we know when, where, and how, and will therefore be ready. Rocklock scowls. Night Eye doesn't blame him. There's no such thing as a perfect plan, and there's plenty that Night Eye doesn't like about this particular one. But it's the only one that has any hope of guaranteeing both victory and finality. Nervous? Night Eye asks before Midoriya has left for the day. No more than usual, his protege says brightly. You always come up with the best strategies, sir. From anyone else, such a statement would sound like flattery. From Midoriya it sounds like a simple fact. Night Eye isn't sure how he does it, but everything Midoriya says sounds like that. If it comes out of Midoriya's mouth, it's straightforward, honest, and uncomplicated. Night Eye knows for a fact that it's not something Midoriya ever learned from him. I'm glad you and Midoriya are getting along, Midoriya continues blithely, either missing or pretending not to notice Night Eye sputter over it. I was a little worried for a while, but better late than never, I guess. Yes, well, Night Eye says at length. Things got out of hand, I'll admit. But I came to realize that I wasn't taking your advice, even though I had asked for it in the first place. Oh. Midoriya's cheeks darken. Oh, I'm sure I didn't. I mean, anyone could have. Don't let me catch you selling yourself short, Night Eye says in a mock-scolding tone. Midoriya grins. Right. Sorry, sir, won't happen again. He shrugs into his jacket. Do you need anything from me before I go? Not that I can think of, Night Eye replies. Go, before you miss a curfew. Thanks, sir. Oh, I almost forgot, my internship for the term is almost up, but is there still space for winter? Night Eye frowns. You sure you should be worrying about that? That's the last term before you graduate. You'll want to focus on exams, I would think. Oh, I will be. Midoriya smiles ruefully. If I can't manage to get an internship, that'll be all I do. Our teachers are already starting to drop hints about drilling us, and I'll need to break it up with something I love doing, or I might just crack. Please. If nothing else, it'll remind me why all the cram sessions are worth it. For a moment, Night Eye can only gape at him. He wasn't expecting an honest-to-goodness, heartfelt conversation today. He isn't at all prepared. Miria's grin turns impish. Did I lay it on too thick? Little bit. Night Eye takes the offered chance to spin it into something flippant. I mean, really. As if you would have any trouble managing to convince pro-heroes to work with you. His protege Baines. Well, I learned from the best. Bah. Night Eye returns to his papers. You're always welcome here. You know that. And I'm sure you don't need my help filling out the paperwork. I'm serious, Mirio says earnestly. I wouldn't have made it this far without you, sir. You made it this far because you made the effort, Night Eye says, trying to match the matter-of-fact simplicity that Mirio wields so easily. I didn't force that from you. You did that all on your own. It's only as the words leave his mouth that he realizes how incredibly, bewilderingly true they are. Mirio is going to be a great hero, though that was never in question. But he's come so far in the short time that Night Eye has known him, from a boy who could barely control his own quirk to a masterful combatant with or without it. And he's done it through his own desire, his own will to keep moving forward and fighting and striving, his own and no one else's. He's never needed anyone's power but his own. Mirio's going to be a fantastic hero without one for all. That was always going to be true. He doesn't need foresight to know that. He can see it unfolding right in front of him. He's seen it every day since the moment he first laid eyes on him. His protege leaves for the day, heedless of what he might have had in a future that never was, unaware of Night Eye's quite little revelation. Night Eye smiles over his work as something settles within him, something very much like peace. For the first time in 6 years, the path ahead is clear. Everyone and everything is precisely where they need to be. The future is theirs to shape, and they're going to make it a bright one. Chapter 57. One morning Aizawa-sensei walks into the classroom in the middle of Midnight's history lecture. He doesn't say anything, nor make any noticeable gesture. But as soon as he steps inside, 4 members of the class quietly get up, pack their things, and follow him back out. The rest don't think much of it. Internships are internships, and it's not the first time it's made them miss class. Uraraka and Kirishima keep shooting glances at each other, at Aizawa, at Midoriya and Asui. Their energy is high, and it shows. Asui is as calm and silent as Aizawa, facing forward with a stony expression. Midoriya's eyes flicker from side to side. His lips move as if he's trying to voice his thoughts aloud. It's time. One would think an abandoned metro tunnel to be the perfect spot for a villain's lair, but it serves the hero's purpose just as well. Years of disuse show in the entrance alone. It's filthy and dank. This place hasn't been touched by a janitor's broom in a long time. Past an unassuming door with a coded, fingerprinted lock, the place transforms. The filth is gone, the air is clean, and beyond the first hallway it opens up to a proper hero facility. The old tunnels have been renovated in past years, shaping the formerly derelict tunnels into a hidden base of operations. It's a pity that today's events will most likely expose its existence. But if that's the price for bringing down a man as dangerous and ruthless as Overhaul, then the heroes will happily pay it. There is only one point of entry, and Ochika can see it from where she stands with Tsuyu, Nejai-senpai, and Yukio before them. For all intents and purposes, they are on the front lines. When Overhaul and his people come calling, they'll be the first to know, at least according to Sir Night Eye's intelligence reports. Deku hasn't said it outright, but she knows that most of that intelligence has to come from him. And yet no one is surprised about how much Night Eye knows about what's to come. Deku is scary, but Sir Night Eye must be pretty scary, too. She takes a deep breath to settle her nerves. It's a mixed blessing to be at the front of the action. They are guaranteed to be in danger, but the escape routes are easiest to reach from their position. The deeper you get into the base, the easier it is to get stuck in the dark with no way out. And that's where Deku, Kirishima, Tagada-senpai and Imagika-senpai, Aizawa-sensei, and most of the other heroes in this operation are. The warning goes out, villains incoming, brace yourselves, before an explosion reaches Ochiko's ears and a towering juggernaut of a man bursts in at the head of the wave of villains. Ochiko braces herself, readies her quirk, and takes her position as Yuki grows and grows and grows. There's a reason they were put in this room instead of deeper in. It's the only one that can fit the dragon heroine's full wingspan. Just a few minutes ago there had been a very unassuming door with a rusted keypad that looked decades old. Now there's a gaping hole big enough to fit 10 men standing shoulder to shoulder. Masked Yakuzas pour through, most of them with their quirks already activated. There's a lot of hooting and hollering involved. Not so much organization. Himiko watches them thunder into the hero base, pushing and shoving and climbing over each other for the chance to get in first, and blows the longest, loudest raspberry she can. Lami, she says, and if it weren't for the fact that Tamira was standing so close, he wouldn't be able to hear her over all the yelling. I can't believe Overhaul has that big, fancy quirk, and all he's using it for is opening doors. Tamira grunts. He's leaving all the hard work to the NPCs, he says. Pretty simple. Bring in a bunch of cannon fodder to make a lot of noise, make everyone think that's all you got. Hide the buses in the grunts so the enemy team can't tell which is which till it's too late. Oh. She draws out the noise as loopy and sing-song as she can make it. That's pretty smart, she says, reluctantly. Not really, Tamura spits. Didn't work when I tried it. Don't see why he thinks it'll work for him. He snarls quietly. He thinks he's better than us. Yep, Himiko says, popping the P between her lips. I bet that's why he's trying to be our boss, huh? The thought gives her the giggles. Overhaul, boss of the League of Villains. It's really kind of funny. Even funnier is that they said yes, and Overhaul even believed them after what he did to Magna-chan. 1 second she was talking, and the next she was a pair of legs and a splatter on the wall before anyone could blink. He did that to her in front of them, didn't try to fix it or even say sorry, and he thinks they're going along with him just like that. That's the problem with people who use lots and lots and lots of pawns. Sometimes they forget which ones are important, too. Tamura grunts again. You know what to do. It's a good thing the Yakuzas are yelling so loud. It means that none of them see Himiko's excited little dance or hear her sing, sabotage. Their main goal, Tamura says, is to take out the competition. And hey, why not grab the anti-quirk serum and kill a few heroes on the way out? Plus, Himiko thinks, she has enough of Izu's blood to take the little girl, too. The doctor may be gone, but the doctor was nobody special, just a man who was very smart and very ambitious, and smart, ambitious men are a dime per dozen. The doctor was one and he's gone, Overhaul is one and he'll soon be gone, too. They are bound to find someone who knows what to do with little Leia-chan. Oh, I wish Mr. Compress was here, she says. It would be so easy with him. He's so quick, and his quirk would make it easy to take Air-chan out from under everyone's noses. And Izu-chan's here, she says, a breathy little whisper that's almost a giggle. I know it. Mr. Compress is so good at making him behave. Izu is so tricky without Mr. Compress around. She knows it's so obvious Izuku knows her. She's not sure, she doesn't have proof, but she just knows that no matter what face she wears, he'll always know her. Later, Tamura snaps. Kurodiri's working on it. Focus on what we are doing here. Okay, she says. Can to go in now? I want to catch up to twice already. He grunts a third time, nods, and watches her slip in among the howling mob. She steals some blood here and there as she goes, just in case and just because. She won't need it. She has all the blood she needs for what's coming. The call goes out and word spreads via radios and earpieces. The villains have made their move. Instinctively, Shouder reaches out to rest his hand on Midoriya's shoulder. He knows that his student has promised to behave, but he also knows that Uraraka and Asui are closest to the villain's point of entry, and if anything bad happens to them, Midoriya will find out before he does. It's Katsuke Rikia, Midoriya says. One of the 8 expendables. His quirk is stamina absorption. Overhaul likes to use him to break through defensive lines. Chooser says he's probably carrying a dose of trigger just in case he needs that extra boost. Shouder nods and passes the information along. At the moment they are alone, ghosts notwithstanding, and waiting for more information. The accusers will get past the first line of defense they are supposed to. According to Night Eye's plan, the heroes are divided into teams and positioned at strategic points throughout the base in order to filter out more and more villains as they make their way deeper into the tunnels. The exceptions to this are Night Eye and Centipede, who have A at the point farthest from the main entrance but closest to one of the base's many secret exists, Lemillion, whose quirk allows him the mobility to run interference throughout the base, and finally Shouder and Midoriya. For now, they are hidden so that Midoriya can keep feeding them with information from his network, and Shouder can wait for someone to get eyes on a priority target. Their top priority is Overhaul himself. Right beneath him is Iranaka Joy, codename Mimic, who can inhabit and control objects, and under the influence of Trigger, can do the same with entire locations. And beneath both of them, but above the rest of the 8 Precept's foot soldiers, are the League of Villains. Apparently, rumors of collaboration between the two forces are more than mere rumors. In any case, Shouder's quirk makes him the best man for capturing any of these targets. Overhaul's quirk alone is far more potent than any other player in this conflict. The goal is for Shouder to get eyes on him as soon as possible. Unfortunately, he's also rather unwilling to let Midoriya out of his sight. But they'll cross that bridge when they come to it. The area they are in is empty to Shouder's eyes, but if Midoriya's constant stream of mumbling is any indication, they are absolutely swimming in ghosts. It's almost comforting in a way that Shouder tries not to read too much into. Is this how Midoriya behaves when no one's watching? Then he remembers the muttering and the half-disguised hand motions that present MIC said were signs and finger spelling, and all the times that Midoriya has laughed or switched moods for no apparent reason. So maybe it's how he behaves when people are watching. Why would it matter? Of course no one's going to look at him and think ghosts. They are just going to think he's weird. Mimics in Tunnel 4W, Midoriya says suddenly, jarring Shouder out of his thoughts. You sure? At least in the last 5 minutes. His students' eyes are bright and intent, focused on someone Shouder can't say. They didn't see his body, but is making his way through by inhabiting a cloak and mask. Shouder hesitates. Logically, Mimic's body shouldn't be far from the objects he's possessing, but... His thoughts are interrupted by Lemillion, who emerges from a nearby wall and zeroes in on a Razorhead. Oh, there you are, he says. Mimic has been spotted in Tunnel 4W. His body? Shouder asks. Lemillion smiles grimly. Rocklock found him. As far as we know, he hasn't taken any Trigger yet. But Rocklock's radio was damaged in the fight, so he sent me to get you. Lemillion doesn't have a comm of his own, he can't take any equipment through solid matter that isn't made of his own hair. Deku, Shouder says. I'm right behind you. I'll check in with Sir, Lemillion tells them. Good luck. Tunnel 4W isn't far. It's roughly halfway between the entrance and the chamber where Night Eye is holed up with the girl. That's probably why Lemillion wants to check in with him. The villains are progressing, and Night Eye needs to be kept abreast of how close they are to reaching him. If Mimic is that close, then Overhaul can't be far away. Midoriya starts to pull ahead. It's not that he's trying to take the lead, just that he doesn't need to follow Shouder to know where to go. Whether it's because of ghosts or because he, like Shouder, memorized the layout at the start isn't clear. Either way, Shouder reaches out to stop him before he overtakes him completely. Don't rush ahead, Shouder warns. We can't know for sure what's around the corner. I can, Midoriya points out. It's that kind of casual confidence that can easily turn cocky if it isn't checked. Don't put all your faith in informants, Shouder tells him. It's not really the time for a lecture, but it's not the time either. Could a ghost lie to you if it wanted? Midoriya frowns. Why would they? They are dead, what could they possibly gain from? The floor pitches beneath them, sending them both airborne. Shouder manages to land on his feet. Midoriya hits the ground and rolls to a crash close by. The tunnel shudders and rolls all around them, bowing inward and outward as if heaving for breath. When it finally settles, it's in an entirely different shape than it was before. Oh, balls, Midoriya mutters. Shouder steps closer on instinct, mind racing. This can only be Mimic, meaning he's slipped free of Rocklock and taken Trigger to enhance his power. If he has enough control to twist the tunnel around them into a new shape, then he definitely has enough to separate them if he wants. Reports come in over the radio frequency. There are others in the area experiencing the results of Mimic's quirk, and Shouder calls in with one of his iron. As far as he can tell, the damage has reached tunnels 4E, 3W, and 2W. Beyond that, heroes only report noise and rumbling, but no physical change. Keep an eye out for Rocklock, he advises. His comm is damaged, and as far as I know, he was the last to see Mimic's body. Acknowledgements crackle over the line. Other heroes have heard and will pass on the message if need be. It's all that he can do, for now. Ochiko lifts her visor just long enough to spit out a mouthful of blood, then rolls out of the way and springs back to her feet. Katsuke Rukia is as big as Fat Gum if not bigger, hopped up on Trigger and filled to the brim with stolen vitality. He's massive, strong, and way faster than someone his size should be. They can't afford to stay still for a moment. Well, okay, maybe Yuki can, but Yuki is twice his size and a dragon, so she doesn't count. Ochiko isn't like Deku. She's not a numbers girl, and she can't tally up stats and pick apart the minutiae of the fight as she's participating in it. But, that being said, she knows they can win this with that firm certainty she feels when taking a test she studied for. Her tongue still froths and bleeds from where she bit it when Katsuke knocked her into the wall. She thinks her shoulder might be sprained, but she can still use it, for the most part. Tsuyu looks mostly all right even with one eye slowly swelling shut. Nejaya is doing better than both of them, because she's been careful not to let Katsuke touch her. Her quirk runs on vitality, and Katsuke's lets him drain it away. Thanks to the limited space, Yuki's size, Katsuke's speed, and the constant motion, Nejaya hasn't been able to get a clear shot yet. But they are getting there. They just need to pin him down in one spot for a few seconds, and this fight will be over. An opening appears, and Ochiko locks eyes with Tsuyu. Katsuke's rampage has left plenty of rubble for them to work with. In a split second she and Tsuyu are airborne, raining hell down on Katsuke's head. Katsuke tries to dart out of range. A smack from Yuki knocks him back into it, but there's only one of her and one of Nejaya who's too small to cover the rest, and Katsuke escapes. Winning this one fight won't solve all their problems, especially when Katsuke is wearing them down in the process. Once Katsuke is down, they have to head deeper and help strengthen the trap. That means more twisty corners, more tight spaces, more risks, more villains. If they go in battered and exhausted, they'll be no help to anyone. This one villain is giving them enough trouble as it is, and they have to assume there will be more of them. The moment that thought crosses her mind, there's a blur of motion, and a familiar dark figure darts into their midst. Oi! Katsuke roars. What the hell are you doing here, twice? I've got this handled. Ochiko's heart plummets. Twice of the League of Villains. The one who copies things. Copies people. Hey, don't yell at me, I'm just following orders. Twice whines, before his voice shifts to a guttural roar. Don't tell me what to do, you stupid bastard. Especially when you're getting your ass kicked. Katsuke snarls and shoves past him, barreling toward Yuki to fight her head-on. Twice charges after him, one hand outstretched. Yuki lunges to meet them both in the middle. There's a flash, and suddenly the chamber gets cramped. Ochiko braces herself, reaching out to grip Tsuyu's arm. And then her mouth drops open, and she hears Nejaya squeal in excitement. A second Yuki dragon stands beside the first, towering over both villains and looking very surprised to be there. Oops, Twice says faintly. You idiot. Katsuke roars, but Twice is already fleeing into the dark. Shouldn't have shoved me, he yells over his shoulder, and then is gone. Katsuke stares up at the two Yukis grinning down at him, showing two identical sets of very, very sharp teeth. Would you like to surrender, the original Yuki asks. Or would you rather draw this out further? It's all the same to me. By some miracle, Kirishima is still on his feet. Actually, it's mostly because he's propped up against a Magiki, but it's still quite a feat given the beating he's taken, by Taishira's reckoning. Mentally, he takes stock of things. He's burned through about a third of his reserves of fat, so not super great, but not terrible either. Kirishima's been blocking and countering with Unbreakable, but is running on fumes, and Taishira can see the spider web of cracks running through his hardened skin. Amajiki's taken a few hits, so he's not exactly fresh, but Taishira knows for a fact that he has at least one Chimera Kraken attack in him and is waiting for the right moment. It's the damned barrier that's the problem. Unlike Kirishima's Unbreakable, the villain whose name Taishira can't remember seems perfectly able to keep it up as long as he wants and only drops it so Rapper What's-His-Name can get in an obnoxious amount of rapid-fire hits before it goes up again. Actually no, that's not the only problem. The other problem is that Rapper won't shut up. What's the matter with you? The villain roars, winding up for another flurry of blows. He may be masked, but Taishira can tell the villain's eyes are fixed on him. You think I can't tell you three are pulling punches on me? It's like you're not even trying to win, cowards. Taishira grinds his teeth. They aren't pulling punches. They can't afford to pull punches because holding back against these two means death. They're just not out to kill anyone, that's all. But Rapper doesn't seem to see a difference between winning and killing. And then, as if things can't possibly get any worse, reinforcements arrive for the villains. Another masked figure, one that Taishira hasn't seen yet, materializes from the shadows and slips behind the shield. The hell are you doing here? Rapper snarls. Don't yell at me, I'm here on Overhaul's orders. He knows best, the barrier villain says. You aren't. I figured I'd need it, the newcomer replies, pulling a wicked-looking knife. This only enrages Rapper further, and he chafes against the shield holding him back. Have you no pride? He spits, literally spits. Taishiro sees saliva fly from the mask and punches the barrier in a fit of fury. There's nothing more tasteless than bringing a knife to a fight. What's the matter? Can't win without a weapon. He tosses his head, winding up his right arm experimentally, as if checking that his quirk still works. That ain't a real fight. Men were meant to rip each other apart with their own hands. You feel me? Yeah, the newcomer says cheerfully. I feel you. And as the heroes watch, they step right up to the barrier villain, Tenai, that was the name, and draw the knife blade across his throat. It's quick, effortless, and downright anticlimactic. Tenai slunks to the ground like a puppet with cut strings, and his barrier flickers and vanishes. The knife falls to the floor with a clutter. The villain previously holding it melts like candle wax before vanishing with an almost girlish giggle. Rapper spares the briefest glance for his comrade, then settles into a fighting stance. He's probably grinning behind that mask. Finally, he says in a voice that trembles with joy. Kirishima gapes at the dead man in blank shock. Taishiro draws him closer, and Amajiki explodes into a blur of hard shells and lashing tentacles. This is one of the worst-case scenarios Shouder has been dreading. Having the layout of the base memorized is absolutely useless when one of the villains can shape it to his will. It means he's now relying on Midoriya to lead the way, which was one of the many things he wanted to avoid today. But Midoriya says he knows the way, and second-guessing allies in the field hinders more than it helps. So Shouder follows him, waits when he deliberates, and stabs down on the teacher in him that chafes at being told what to do by a student. They are teacher and student here, they are heroes in the field, and seniority doesn't count for much when Midoriya has the quirk advantage. Talk to me, he says. I don't like flying blind. What are we looking at? The tunnels aren't destroyed, Midoriya replies. They still lead from one place to the next. They are just different. There are more points of intersection, and he added trick hallways that loop back around or lead to dead ends. So the way isn't blocked off, it's just a maze now. Fantastic. Are there any? Midoriya goes still, one hand out to stop Shouder from going forward, and Shouder bites tongue and listens. There are footsteps coming, an uneven step shuffle that indicates injury, and before he can ask if it's friend or foe, the newcomer is already upon them. He sighs with relief. It's Rocklock, limping and looking rather worse for wear. But he's alive, and that was Shouder's main concern, so he allows himself an increment of relaxation. What happened with Mimic, he asks. He got the drop on me, Rocklock trembles. But I know where his body is. The three of us could. He doesn't get any further than that before Midoriya punches him in the throat. His student looks to him for a split second, and Shouder hasn't seen him look like that since the end of the provisional license exam. His capture weapon snaps around Rocklock's wrists and torso, and a powerful yank sends him crashing to the floor with a startled cry. He lands face first on the ground, and when he raises his head there's an unsettlingly wide smile on his face, even as his features are melting away. He takes a step toward Midoriya. The tunnel shakes and a wall forms between them, shutting like a camera iris inches from his face. Shouder is left alone in the tunnel, holding half his ruined catcher weapon in his hands. I knew it. Tota's voice, caught somewhere between Rock Lock's and her own, trembles with delight. There's something about the uneven timbre, the razor-sharp smile, the way her tone pitches and vibrates with unrestrained glee that fills Izuku with visceral, bile-churning horror. I knew it. You do know me. Don't you, Izuku-chan? Her voice finally settles at its usual high, breathy pitch. She gets smaller as she sheds her disguise and the remains of Aizawa's capture weapon fall away. Her smile doesn't change, even as her false face sloughs off. The horror turns to revulsion. The real one is twisted, and not just from her smile. Izuku can see how the line of her nose curves and bends in ways it wasn't meant to, bordered by scars of deep bite wounds that healed poorly. Her skin is rough and patchy with marks left by burns. Izuku can almost recognize the pattern of them. Both he and Bakugo left their marks on her in Kamina. He can almost taste the blood in his teeth again. Watch out, Arai warns. She's faster than she looks, and she won't let you grab her. Tota's former victims stand at a distance to keep from hampering Izuku's movement. He appreciates the gesture and the advice. He's glad that he isn't alone. I knew I was right. Toga lashes out in a blur, cutting a harmless slit in the top layer of his costume. He jerks back just in time to keep the damage to the top layer of material. The slice spans the width of Izuku's chest, but doesn't touch skin. You can't deny it, can you, Izuku-chan? Can you? She giggles, high and bright with joy. No matter what I look like, no matter whose face I'm wearing, you know. You always know me. That's never happened before. I've never met anyone like you. Luckily, the feeling's mutual, Izuku says flatly. Tota's next knife swing cuts off the lock of his hair as he ducks away. I know you haven't. Of course you haven't, it's fate. You feel it too, you have to. She flies at him again, and he knocks her back by roundhouse kick he loaned from Ida. He has to shut her out. What she's saying doesn't matter and can't hurt him, especially if he can take her out here. One of the ghosts passes through the newly formed wall. He's still there, she says. He hasn't left. He's trying to find a way through. Izuku turns and slams into it with all his might. It's not a sturdy wall, even with one blow, he feels it start to give. Behind you. Izuku whirls around at the warning and catches the next blow on his shoulder instead of across his back. This one does draw blood and is treated to the side of Toga, licking it off the blade like honey off a cone. Another disguise slides into place, and suddenly it's his own face looking back at him, smiling that smile. You're mine, Izuku-chan, she sing-sums in his voice. You've always been mine. I don't even have to become you, because we are already the same. You even smile like me, see? She smiles, and it's almost the same as his. The only difference is that it's the only smile she has. Izuku punches it, and doesn't smile back. Does anyone have eyes on Rock Lock? Eraserhead asks over the radio, and Night Eye shuts his eyes and rocks back and forth slowly. The best laid plans go awry, but he would have liked them to go awry without killing his colleagues. Era sits quietly beside him, clutching a plush toy for comfort. She hasn't made a sound since all this started, and Night Eye's not sure if that's a good thing or not. What's your status, Eraserhead, he asks. Minik took control of the area around Tunnel 4W. I'm close to Deku but cut off, there's a wall between us, and is fighting Toda on the other side. It's almost reason to hope, Night Eye thinks. The boy fought her to a standstill once, and it took another villain exploding his fears to turn the tables. If they are fighting alone, then Midoriya has a chance. He says as much to Eraserhead, choosing his words carefully so that Ero won't overhear. Midoriya is too far away to touch. Night Eye only hopes he isn't misjudging his future. The back of Izuku's head hits the wall hard, and his vision goes grey and dark. In the literal blink of an eye he's blind and reliant on the ghost to shout warnings and pull him out of the way of her knife. But they can't warn him when the ground pitches beneath him to strain his steady balance. Toga sees her chance. The world flips and careens, and Izuku's back hits the ground with punishing force. Dazed, he loses his grip on One for All, and the voices of the dead fade into the background. The dark spots still cloud his vision, but he can feel her straddling him, knees pressing his ribs tight enough to bruise. Her hand is at his throat, squeezing, and it takes both of his hands just to loosen her grip so he can breathe. He feels the tip of a knife trace around his face, the outline of the scarring on his eye. "Your scar is so pretty," she whispers. "Who hurt you, baby? Tell me their name and I'll kill them for you. Would you like that?" "I would. I always kill the things I don't like." He struggles, teeth gnashing as he tries to reach the arm holding his throat, and she bounces the back of his head into the floor again. Or, I can make new ones. Just like the ones you left on me. I was looking at them in the mirror and I realized you kissed me, Izu-chan. That was our first kiss. The blade slides toward his nose, stinging without drawing blood. "Can I kiss you too?" "Get off of me," Izuku chokes out. One for All crackles to life again, and he wrenches her hand away and lashes out with his fist. He's half blind, but he catches her in the mouth. Her fangs catch on his glove without piercing it, and he hears something break. She hits back, and he sees stars. When they fade, his vision starts to clear again. Something drips against his face, her disguise is changing again, and when she speaks, her voice, his voice, starts to shift as well. "I like you," she says. "And you're going to like me too. It'll be easy. I can be anyone you want to be." Her dark hair pales and her stolen face drips away. There's a scar underneath. It's not his scar, and it's not hers either. "How about this?" she asks with Shouder's voice, with a broken, bloody smile on his face. "Do you like this better?" Izuku freezes. "You do. You do like this better." "I knew it. I thought so." Her fingers squeeze around his throat again. "That's why I took it. But I only got a little. I'll have to get more. So much more." Izuku's fingers curl around the thumb digging into his pulse point. Dark spots fill his vision again as he grips it and wrenches it back until it snaps. Toda screams. The knife comes down again. The burst of fiery pain in his shoulder is so distant it might as well be happening to someone else. His ears ring with Toda's screams as he tears her broken hand from his neck and finally gets one leg between them to kick her away. Muted explosions draw his attention to the half-crumpled wall. Dust clouds billow out and the rest of the wall comes tumbling down. Izo must have brought charges with him, and now he's free to help, but his capture weapon is cut in half and Toda is well out of range. The knife is still in her hand. There's a crazed gleam that doesn't belong in Shouder's eyes as she lunges again. She stops in her tracks, face freezing in its grimace. Small, pale hands clutch the sides of her head, and behind her, a mass of tangled black hair rides and twists in the dark. Rei hovers behind her, a pitch-black shadow with 2 points of pale light for eyes. Toda has a split second of surprise. And then the screaming starts again. Izuku presses his hands over his ears, but it's not enough to block out the sound. This isn't pain. Toda screaming when he broke her hand, that was pain. This is terror. This is what haunts him at night. This is what he faced 8 years ago in a closet just 2 hallways down from his second-grade classroom. This is primal fear encoded into the deepest pits of the human psyche, and Izuku's watching his sister reach down, tear down its barriers, and let it flood. Toda's eyes meet his for a split second, wild with panic. She turns tail and flees into the dark. Her voice shifts back into her own as it fades away, until only the echoes are left. Slowly, Rei fades back to normal. It takes even longer for the other ghosts to come back out of hiding. Technically, Shouder has seen Midoriya look worse. It's not much of a consolation. He's shaken as he checks his student over and hastily dresses the wound on his shoulder. It's not every day you see a villain halt mid-lunge and run off screaming bloody murder. Especially a villain like Toda Himiko. Ghost thing, Midoriya says by way of explanation, and Shouder lets him leave it at that. Should we keep going? No, Shouder says firmly. You're very lucky that she missed a major blood vessel, but she still damaged muscle and tendon. I'm taking you back to Night Eye. Midoriya bridles. I can still. The answer is no, Shouder says firmly. Night Eye and I made an agreement. If you were injured on my watch, I'd take you to wait with him by escape route. I'm not risking your safety for your sense of personal pride. Midoriya scowls, but follows him. I'm not a guest here, he points out sullenly. This isn't the work experience week. You all told me these internships were for real. Am I a hero right now, or just a student? Would you like to become a liability? Shouder asks, and that shuts him up. You can continue to relay information from Night Eye's position. You won't be useless. That seems to satisfy him, for the most part. How many are with us? Shouder asks. He doesn't really need to know, but it's useful to find out and to keep Midoriya distracted with questions. Ray's here, he says. But she's always here. Narita and Mrs. Kiriyama. Couple of police officers and one of Overhaul's former art co-workers. He wipes a trickle of blood from his face. There were some others before. Toda's victims. They followed her when she ran to keep track of her. They say the League's planning something, plotting against Overhaul. Also useful information. Anyone else? Chooser will probably come around soon, Midoriya says. She's been making rounds, watching Overhaul's forces for anything or anyone she recognizes. Any sign of Overhaul? Not yet, he says. He's probably hiding as someone else. Shouldn't take them long to find him. Shouder nods, opens his mouth to reply, and he can't explain it. He never can, no matter how many times it happens. Call it instinct, experience, or sixth sense, whatever it is, he listens to it every time. As if in answer to the prickle up his spine, Midoriya's head whips around. We're being hunted, he says. A razorhead. The wall tears itself open. Aizawa glimpses masked faces beyond, more than 2 but less than 10, charging out to flank them. Shouder's eyes burn as he activates his quirk, and is rewarded when one of the villains trips and falls. One masked face stands at the forefront of the rest, reaching up to pull back his hood. Movement. A blur. A projectile. An attack. Shouder has less than no time to tell the difference. Villains are closing in, cutting off their escape, and there's something heading straight for Midoriya. It's not so much a choice as it is a reflex. Shouder throws himself in front of it, and throws his student past the encroaching villains. Something pierces his costume and stings against his back. Midoriya looks back at him, and Shouder can see the intent in his eyes. Get him out, he says, to people who he can neither hear nor see. Get him to Night Eye. His jaw locks, and so does the rest of his body. His muscles won't obey commands from his body. But his eyes still work, and he can see his student dragged to safety by an unseen force before the tunnel slams shut again, leaving him alone with his captors. Izuku struggles and kicks, but it's no use. The tunnel is closed and Aizawa is beyond his reach. The ghosts are pulling him farther and farther away, and they are past feeling pain. Let go, he yells uselessly. Let go, I can't jest. You have to. Chooser barks at him. She's the one who showed up at the last moment, told them they had villains on their tail, but too late, too late. Midoriya, listen. Listen. Narita's in his face now. Me and Kiriyama will stay with him. If anything goes wrong, we'll raise the alarm and you can have Night Eye send the cavalry. They could be killing him right now. They won't, Chooser snaps. He's valuable to them. Think a quirk that erases quirks. That's exactly what Overhaul needs for his goals. They won't kill him. He's more valuable to them alive. The thought of Aizawa in the same place Air was imprisoned, tortured, mined for his quirk, makes Izuku sick. But she's right. Aizawa's life isn't in immediate danger. Ray gives his arm an insistent tug, and he finally stops fighting the ghosts and starts heading deeper into the tunnels beyond Mimic's reach to where Night Eye hides with A. I do have good news, though, Chooser says. I found Overhaul. He's hidden among his foot soldiers over in Tunnel 5N. He has a ways to go before he reaches the girl. Izuku fumbles for his radio and sets it to Night Eye's frequency. He should have alerted Night Eye as soon as things went wrong. It doesn't take long for Night Eye to reply. Status report. This is Deco, Midoriya says. Mimic still in control of the tunnels around 4W. Eraserhead's been captured. I'm heading your way. Should be there in about 3 minutes. He hears Night Eye inhale sharply over the line. Don't take any risks, he says. Less than a minute later, Tagada emerges from the wall. He looks windblown and a little breathless, but Izuku can't see any injuries on him. Night Eye sent me, Tagada says. He said you were injured. One of the ghosts snickers. Izuku stares at him, nonplussed. I didn't tell him I was. Yeah, I figured. Tagada steps closer, his cape sweeping behind him. It's got a few rips and holes in it. Tagada has seen his share of action already. They reach the rendezvous point in little time. It's an unassuming door among dozens of other unassuming doors. On the other side, they find Night Eye and Air standing at the entrance to the secret exit. I know where Overhaul is, Izuku blurts out as soon as the door is shut behind him. At his approach, Eri, as if drawn by a magnet, moves to latch onto his leg. He's over in 5N, surrounded by foot soldiers. Night Eye hesitates. We're split between suppressing the foot soldiers and taking out the elites, he says. I just sent Yuki's team to track down Mimic. I can go after Overhaul, Tagada says. Night Eye shuts his eyes. Mirio. It's only logical, isn't it? Mirio's eyes gleam. His quirk is touch-based and is supposed to be armed with his quirk-canceling bullets. My quirk is the perfect counter to both. Night Eye purses his lips. I'm sending Centipede and Bubble Girl in the same direction, he says. They're your backup, aren't they? Tagada says. They are the only ones who can be spared, and I don't want anyone challenging Overhaul alone. He levels a stern look at Tagada. You will not engage with Overhaul before you rendezvous with them, do you understand? Yes, sir. Night Eye nods. Go. And be careful. Tagada throws a salute that's almost cheeky, ruffles Air's hair, and vanishes through the door with a flick of his cape. How's your shoulder? Night Eye asks. Izuku glances at it. Fine, he says, and Ray hisses at the Fed. I mean, it's about as good as you'd expect. It hits him all at once. He's been suppressing it so long and so easily that he barely realized he was doing it at all. Aizawa's capture. The influx of ghosts that came with the villains. Toga. Toga fucking Himiko. There are hands on his shoulders, steadying him. A second set of hands grips his pant leg. I'm fine, he hears himself way. I'm its chest. You are not fine, Night Eye tells him. You're not supposed to be fine. You're supposed to be on edge, upset, and afraid. Oh, Izuku says absently. That's good, then. Because I am all of those things. I'd be concerned if you weren't. Once he's sure that Izuku won't fall over, Night Eye releases him. Can we get Eri out yet? Izuku asks. Not as long as Overhaul is free and his forces are watching the surrounding area, Night Eye says. Once he's captured and his men know he's captured, then it will be safe. I don't mind hiding longer, Eri says. You've been very brave, Night Eye tells her. But don't worry. It won't be long now. It won't be long at all, Chuzo echoes. Suddenly, Ray jerks upright. She whips around so quickly that Izuku jumps, but before he can ask her what's wrong, she goes for Chuzo's throat. Ray. Izuku steps toward her, confused and alarmed, as Chuzo vanishes and reappears out of her reach. What's... Hey. Izuku doesn't know the new voice, doesn't see who it is until more ghosts appear in the room, one after another, the faces of civilians and police officers and criminals alike. The speaker is one of the criminals, who's staring around the room in wide-eyed confusion and alarm. What the hell are you still doing here, he demands. Chuzo, you were supposed to warn them. Midoriya. Night Eye says. We need to go, Izuku says, and turns toward the escape route. Now. Something's wrong. The words are barely past his lips when the entrance peels back with a deafening shriek of metal and the surrounding walls are ripped away like cardboard. Izuku goes for A on instinct, shielding her from flying debris. He half expects the ceiling to come crashing down on top of them, but instead, it opens up as well. When Izuku opens his eyes, he's crouching in a cavern torn into the tunnels, leaving jagged edges and rubble strewn throughout the space. Their escape route is gone. There are ghosts everywhere. And they aren't alone. There are only 3 men standing where there once was a concrete wall and a reinforced door. This wouldn't be nearly as much of a problem if it weren't for the fact that one of them is Overhaul. He's dressed very much like himself and not at all like a foot soldier, and he is nowhere near Tunnel 5N. Slowly, as the ice creaks through his veins, Izuku turns to Chooser. She gives him a pitying look. "Don't look at me like that," she says. "I did tell you before. All I've ever wanted was to make things right." "Chooser, you fucking turncoat," one of the ghosts snarls. Her face twists with fury. "How dare you," she spits back. "How dare you call me a traitor when you would turn on the young master so easily?" "He killed us," the ghost roars. "He killed you. Because we failed him, you coward." Chooser's grimace shifts into a smile that borders on ecstasy. "I failed him, but this is my chance at redemption. And it could have been yours if only you had reached out and taken it instead of abandoning the one you owe your life and loyalty to." "I don't have a life anymore," one of the others says. "I don't owe him a damn thing." "What did you think was gonna happen?" Chooser, says another. "Did you really think you'd get away with all this?" "It will be worth it," Chooser says. "What happens to me doesn't matter. I don't matter. It'll all be worth it." Out of the corner of his eye, Izuku sees Night Eye reach for his common grasp at nothing. He feels for his own, but the earpiece is gone. One of the men flanking Overhaul holds up both devices between the fingers one hand. "Can't let you do that," he says, before dripping them and crushing them under his heel. Setsuno Toya. Quirk, larceny. Allows him to instantly transport an object into his hand. "For all the good that will do you," Night Eye says flatly. "I already sent away the nearest reinforcements." Izuku glances at him, wondering what his play is, but Night Eye looks just as confused to have said that as Izuku is to hear it. "Trying to scare us off with lies?" the third asks. "It won't work. Especially since Overhaul sealed off the area. No one gets in or out until he decides it." He tilts his masked head to the side. "Come now, how do you really feel?" Night Eye grinds his teeth for a moment, then replies, outnumbered. It looks almost physically painful to say. Nemodo Shin. Quirk, confession. Forces you to speak the truth. Overhaul says. "You can fix this, you know." Era flinches and grips Izuku's leg harder. "Come now," Overhaul continues. "You must have known this would happen eventually. It's in your nature to bring suffering to those around you." "Hey, shut up," Izuku snaps. Overhaul ignores him. "They are going to die because of you, Eri. The only way to save them is to come back." "I said shut up." Izuku shouts back. "Now who's trying to scare us off with lies?" He presses his hand to A's shoulder, just in case she starts to believe what she's hearing. "Do you really think you can win?" Nemodo asks. "The two of you, alone against us. Against Overhaul. Do you really think you can come out of this alive?" He feels the pull of the villain's quirk, as if something grips his tongue and forces it to move. "I don't know," his mouth says for him. "What do you think is going to happen if you continue to stand against us?" Nemodo's quirk presses against Izuku's throat. "Are you afraid, boy?" "Yes," comes out of his mouth before it even reaches his brain. Air trembles against him. Izuku looks down and finds her crying without a sound. The room is so crowded and so quiet and so very, very cold. Izuku is, too. "I'm scared," he says, and this is still an answer, so the quirk won't let him lie. "I'm so scared of what I'm going to have to do to you." When he looks up, all eyes are on him. Overhaul glances briefly at Nemodo, then back to him. "What's that supposed to mean?" Nemodo demands. His tongue moves on its own again. He can't stop it from moving, but he can control the shapes it forms. The quote demands truth, and Izuku has so much truth to offer. "You can still leave now," he says. "You don't have to die here. I don't want you to have to die. I get so little sleep as it is. There are so many ghosts in this room, and so many beyond. If Overhaul joins them, then he's going to have to watch what they do to him. Believe me, he says, and his voice trembles as he holds back a hysterical laugh. You really don't want to die here. You don't. Overhaul sighs, shaking his head. Technical truths. Aren't you a clever one? That's your trouble, you know. From the beginning, you've been far too clever for your own good. I'm getting real tired of villains saying nice things about me, Izuku answers. Watch what you say. Nemodo snaps. Overhaul is no villain. The shy Hasakai are proud Yakuza. Overhaul lifts his hand. Such a shame this will be over quickly, he says. I'm going to enjoy watching you suffer. That trid is a memory that he wishes he didn't have, and this time Izuku does laugh. Part of him wonders what that must look like. It's funny, you know, he says. You're so proud of how much better you all are than villains. But you know what? You just said the same thing All For One said before he died. At least he knew he was a worm. Do you really think he can win this? Nemodo asked. You're outmatched. His quirk demands another truth, and Izuku does it. They tore him apart, you know, he says to Overhaul. I'm going to watch them do the same to you. Night Eye's hand closes on his shoulder, his grip firm and steady. Izuku feels his panic in the distance and shelves it for later. They are on their own.